The woman they all wanted gone was the only one who refused to leave. In a place where power decided who stayed and who disappeared, Clara Whitlock made a choice that would ignite a war. 7 broken children, 1 man buried in grief, and a town conspiracy designed to destroy anyone who dared to heal them. This is the story of a woman who walked into hell and decided it was worth saving. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust settled slowly, clinging to Clara Whitlock's black dress like a second skin. She stood at the edge of the Mercer Ranch, one hand gripping the handle of a battered trunk, the other shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun. The land stretched out before her in waves of dry grass and weathered fence posts, a kingdom of silence broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. She was 42 years old, widowed for 3, and had learned to carry rejection like a stone in her pocket, heavy, familiar, impossible to set down. The advertisement had been brief. Cook needed, remote ranch, 7 children, room and board, no references required. That last part had been the deciding factor. Clara had references, but none that would do her any good. The last family she'd worked for had let her go with tight smiles and carefully chosen words. "You're just a bit much for us, Mrs. Whitlock. Perhaps somewhere less refined." Translation: she didn't know her place. She spoke when she should have nodded. She had opinions about how children should be raised, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. So here she was, standing in front of a ranch house that looked like it had given up trying to impress anyone. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged in the middle, and one of the shutters hung at a drunken angle. But the bones were good. She could see that. Solid construction, a wide roof, windows that had once welcomed light. Behind her, the wagon that had brought her from town was already turning around, the driver eager to leave before darkness fell. He hadn't said much during the 2-hour journey, but his silence had been eloquent enough. Nobody wanted to come out here. Nobody stayed. Claire picked up her trunk and started walking. The front door opened before she reached it. The boy who stepped out was maybe 16, all sharp angles and suspicious eyes. He was tall for his age, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw set like a trap about to spring. He held himself like a soldier at a border crossing, every muscle tense with the expectation of invasion. "You the new cook?" His voice was flat, neither welcoming nor hostile. Just empty. "I am." Clara set down her trunk and met his gaze without flinching. "Clara Whitlock." "Jace Mercer." He didn't offer his hand. "You won't last." It wasn't said with cruelty. If anything, there was something almost kind in the warning, the way you might tell someone their shoelace was untied before they tripped. "Maybe not," Clara agreed. "But I'm here now." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at not being contradicted. He'd expected her to argue, to insist she was different from the others. Instead, she just stood there, waiting. "Rules," he said finally. "Pa doesn't talk much. Don't take it personal. Meals at 6, noon, and 6. No exceptions. The young ones go to bed at 8. You cook, you clean the kitchen. You don't go poking around where you're not wanted. You got questions. You ask me, not Pa. And when you leave, when, not if, you give us at least a day's notice so we can find someone else." Clara nodded slowly. "Those your father's rules or yours?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." Jace's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might tell her to get back on that wagon, to save everyone the trouble. But something held him back. Maybe curiosity, maybe exhaustion, maybe the simple fact that they needed someone, anyone, even if only for a few days. "Mine," he admitted. "Pa stopped making rules when Ma died." "How long ago?" 2 years, 3 months, 12 days. The precision was devastating. This boy had been counting every single one. Clara picked up her trunk again. "Show me the kitchen." So the house was worse inside than out. Not dirty, exactly. Someone had been trying to keep up with the basics. But there was a hollowness to it, a sense that life had retreated to the bare minimum. Dishes were washed, but stacked haphazardly. Floors were swept, but not scrubbed. The furniture was pushed against the walls as if the center of each room had become too dangerous to occupy. And everywhere, there was silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a content home, but the thick, suffocating silence of a place where people had stopped trying to communicate, where words had proven useless against grief. Jace led her through the front room. A stone fireplace, cold and clean, dominated one wall, and down a narrow hallway. She caught glimpses of other rooms, a parlor with sheets over the furniture, bedrooms with doors half closed, a study with papers scattered across a desk. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and it was clear this was where life had condensed itself. The large wooden table was scarred with use, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Pots hung from hooks above an iron stove. A window looked out over a vegetable garden that had gone mostly to seed, though someone had tried to maintain a small section of tomatoes and beans. Pantry's there? Jace pointed to a door. Cellar's outside, around back. We get supplies from town once a month. Last delivery was 2 weeks ago, so you should have enough. Well pump's out front. You'll share a room with the girls. He hesitated, then added, They don't talk much either. How many girls? 3, Beth's 14, Caroline's 10, and Lily's 5. He rattled off the names like he was reading from a list. Then there's the boys. Marcus is 12, Thomas is 8, and Samuel's 3. And me. 7, Clara said softly. 7, he confirmed. Ma died having Samuel. Everyone knows that. Some people think... He stopped, jaw working. Doesn't matter what people think. But it did matter. Clara could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists. Someone, probably many someones, had blamed that child for his mother's death. And this boy, this fierce, frightened boy, had been standing guard ever since. "Where's your father?" she asked. "North pasture, won't be back till dark." Jace moved toward the door, clearly eager to escape. "Dinner's at 6. Don't make anything fancy, they won't eat it." He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood in the center of the kitchen, listening to the silence. Then, slowly, she began to unpack her trunk. She found the children one by one, like tracking animals that had learned to hide. The first was Marcus, the 12-year-old, crouched in the barn with a book pressed close to his face. He looked up when her shadow fell across the page, eyes wide with alarm. "I'm Clara," she said, staying in the doorway. "Just wanted to see where things are kept. Don't mind me." He watched her like she might suddenly lunge. When she didn't, when she simply walked to the feed bins and opened them to check their contents, he slowly returned to his book. She noticed the title as she passed, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. The pages were dog-eared and stained, read and reread until the binding cracked. "Good book?" she asked. Marcus nodded but didn't speak. "I always liked Huck better than Tom," Clara said conversationally, running her hand along the wooden slats of a stall. "Tom was always performing, always aware of his audience, but Huck was honest, even when it got him in trouble." She could feel Marcus watching her now, really watching her, the book forgotten in his lap. "Dinner's at 6, she said, and left him there. She found Beth in the bedroom that would now be Clara's as well, a narrow room with 3 beds and a single window. The girl was sitting on the middle bed, mending a shirt with quick, efficient stitches. She was pretty in a wan, faded way, with hair the color of wheat left too long in the sun and eyes that had learned not to expect much. "Beth," Clara said from the doorway. The girl's hands stilled. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Clara. Jace said I'd be sharing this room with you and your sisters. I hope that's all right." Beth blinked as if the question itself was foreign. "It's your room now, ma'am. We'll make do." "It's our room," Clara corrected gently. "And I'd prefer Clara to ma'am if you don't mind. Makes me feel like someone's school teacher." The faintest hint of a smile touched Beth's lips, there and gone like a candle in wind. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, Clara." Clara moved to the empty bed, the one closest to the window, and set down her trunk. "I'll need to know everyone's preferences. What they like to eat, what they can't stand, any allergies or sensitivities. Can you help me with that?" Beth's hands resumed their sewing, but slower now, thoughtful. "We eat what we're given." "I'm sure you do, but that doesn't mean you don't have preferences." Clara began unpacking her few possessions. 2 more dresses, both as plain as the one she wore, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, a small wooden box that she set on the windowsill without opening. For instance, I can't abide raisins. Never could. The texture's all wrong, and I'm not fond of overly sweet things. Give me something savory any day. Beth watched her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. Marcus doesn't like onions. They make him sick. Caroline won't eat anything green. Thomas loves potatoes, any way you make them. Samuel... She stopped, her face clouding. Samuel? Clara prompted gently. Samuel doesn't eat much. Never has. Beth's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He's small, sickly. We try, but... The child your mother died birthing, Clara thought, but didn't say. The one you all love and resent in equal measure. I see, she said instead. Well, we'll figure something out. What about you? What do you like? Beth looked up, startled. It took her a long moment to answer. I don't know. The admission hung in the air between them, heartbreaking in its honesty. This girl, 14 years old, didn't know what she liked because no one had asked in so long she'd forgotten how to have preferences. Then we'll experiment, Clara said briskly, to cover the wave of anger that surged through her. Not at Beth, never at Beth, but at whatever circumstances had taught her that her own desires were too insignificant to matter. Everyone should know what they like. It's important. Beth's sewing had stopped entirely now. Why? Because, Clara said, meeting her eyes, how else will you know who you are? She didn't find the younger children before dinner. They were hiding, Jace told her curtly when she asked. Upstairs, under beds, behind doors, wherever they'd learned to make themselves invisible when strangers invaded their territory. They'll come when they're hungry, he added. Always do. So Clara cooked. She'd learned the craft from her grandmother, a stern German woman who believed that food was the truest form of communication. You can lie with your mouth, she used to say, but never with your hands. Your hands know what people need. Clara's hands worked now almost without conscious thought, moving through the familiar rhythms of preparation. She found eggs in the cold cellar, potatoes in a bin, bacon wrapped in cheesecloth. Simple ingredients, but she could do a lot with simple. The stove fought her at first. It was older than she'd expected, temperamental, with a damper that stuck, but she'd worked with worse. She coaxed it to the right temperature, listening to the tick and pop of heating metal, adjusting the vents until the heat was even. Potatoes, peeled and sliced thin. Bacon, cut into pieces and fried until the fat ran clear. Onions. No, Marcus didn't like onions. She set them aside. Eggs, beaten with a splash of milk she found in the cold box, seasoned with salt and pepper. She assembled it in layers in a deep skillet, potatoes, bacon, eggs poured over the top, then into the oven to finish. While it cooked, she sliced bread, a loaf that was getting stale but would do, and set the table with the mismatched plates she found in the cupboard. 6 o'clock approached. She heard them before she saw them, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of careful feet on stairs, the rustle of children who'd learned to move quietly through their own house. They gathered in the hallway just outside the kitchen, a small crowd of shadows waiting to see what this stranger would do. Clara didn't turn around. She pulled the skillet from the oven, set it on the table, and began cutting it into portions. "Supper's ready," she called. "Come and eat." Silence. Then Jace's voice, rough with authority. "You heard her. Get in here." They filed in like soldiers, taking seats in what was clearly a long-established order. Jace at the head, where his father should have sat. Beth next to him, with Samuel on her lap. Marcus across from them, with Thomas and Caroline flanking him. One chair remained empty, at the far end of the table, opposite Jace. The father's chair, Clara realized. They've left it empty for 2 years. She served them each a portion, ignoring the way they watched her hands, the way they flinched when she moved too quickly. She gave the largest piece to Jace. He was the oldest, still growing, needed the fuel. She gave the smallest to Samuel, a child-sized portion that wouldn't overwhelm. The others received equal shares. Then she sat down in the only remaining chair, not her father's empty throne, but a smaller chair pulled from somewhere else, positioned between Caroline and the wall, and picked up her fork. "Eat," she said simply. They didn't move. Clara took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "It's good," she said, not to them but to herself, a personal assessment. Could use a bit more salt, maybe, but the potatoes are done right. Marcus picked up his fork first. He cut a small piece, examined it suspiciously, then put it in his mouth. His eyes widened. "There's no onions," he said, shocked. "You don't like them," Claire replied, still eating. "Beth told me." One by one, the others began to eat. Tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Thomas made a small sound of pleasure when he tasted the potatoes. Caroline, who supposedly wouldn't eat anything green, picked out the tiny bits of parsley Clara had sprinkled on top, but otherwise cleaned her plate. Only Samuel didn't eat. He sat on Beth's lap, staring at his food with huge, dark eyes. Clara watched him from the corner of her vision. He was tiny for 3 years old, almost fragile, with hair so pale it was nearly white, and skin that looked like it had never seen enough sun. He held himself with a peculiar stillness, as if he'd learned that movement drew attention, and attention led to pain. They love him, and they hate him, she thought again, and he knows it. She didn't try to coax him, didn't tell him to eat, didn't offer bribes or threats. She just kept eating her own dinner, kept the conversation, such as it was, flowing around him like water around a stone. "This is good," Marcus said suddenly. His voice was soft, uncertain, like he wasn't used to offering opinions. "Really good." "Thank you," Clara said. "Ma used to make something like this," Thomas added, "but different. She put cheese in it." The silence that fell was immediate and crushing. Beth's hand tightened on Samuel's small body. Jace's jaw clenched so hard Clara could hear his teeth grind, but Clara just nodded. "Cheese would be good. We have any?" Thomas blinked. I think so. In the cold box?" "We'll try it that way next time," Clara said, as if the mention of their dead mother was nothing more than a useful culinary suggestion. "See which version you prefer." The tension didn't break exactly, but it shifted, became something they could breathe through. They finished eating in a silence that was almost comfortable. The man came in as Clara was washing dishes. She didn't hear him approach, the pump outside muffled his footsteps, but she felt the change in the air when he entered the kitchen. The children, who had been starting to drift away to their evening routines, froze. Clara turned from the sink, drying her hands on her apron. Silas Mercer was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome before grief carved it into something harder. He wore work clothes covered in dust and sweat, and his hands were stained with the kind of dirt that came from fixing fence posts and moving cattle. His hair needed cutting, his beard needed trimming, and his eyes were the worst part. They weren't cold or cruel. They were just absent, like someone had reached in and turned off a light that would never shine again. He looked at Clara the way you might look at a chair or a table, something functional, temporary, utterly replaceable. "You the cook," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara Whitlock. She didn't offer her hand, didn't smile, just stood there, meeting his dead gaze with her living one. He grunted. "Food ready?" "Waiting on the stove. Jace said you eat after the children." Another grunt. He moved past her to the stove, served himself a generous portion, and sat down at the empty chair at the head of the table, the one the children had left vacant, as if by sitting in it he could pretend nothing had changed. He ate mechanically without tasting. Clara watched him for a moment, then returned to her dishes. "Rules," he said between bites. "Jace tell you?" "He did. Anything else you need to know?" Clara considered. "How long do you expect me to stay?" He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Long as you can stand it. They all leave eventually." There was no accusation in his voice, just fact, worn smooth by repetition. "I'm aware," Clara said, "but I prefer to know what I'm walking into. What happened to the others?" Silas set down his fork. For the first time, something almost like emotion flickered across his face. Not quite anger, not quite shame. "Town doesn't like women coming out here. Think it's not proper, not safe. They make it difficult." "How difficult?" "Difficult enough." He picked up his fork again. "You'll see." It was both a warning and a dismissal. Clara accepted it as both. "I'll need supplies," she said, returning to practical matters. "The pantry's low on flour, coffee too, and we're almost out of lamp oil." Make a list. Jace goes to town Fridays. Fine. Clara pulled the plug from the sink, letting the dishwater drain. One more thing. Silas waited. When I leave, if I leave, I'll give you notice. But while I'm here, I'll do my job the way I see fit. I'll cook what I think they need, clean what needs cleaning, and speak when I think speaking's necessary. You don't have to like it, but you do have to allow it. Those are my terms. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. One of the children, listening. Silas studied her with those dead eyes. You won't last a month. Maybe not, Clara agreed. But I'm not leaving because someone tells me to. I'll leave when I decide. Understood? For the first time since he'd entered the kitchen, something almost like interest stirred in his face. You always this stubborn? Always, Clara said. It's gotten me in trouble before. Probably will again. He almost smiled. Almost. Fine. Your terms, for what they're worth. He finished eating in silence, rinsed his plate in the bucket of clean water she'd set aside for that purpose, and left without another word. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his boots on the stairs, the creak of a door opening and closing somewhere above. Then very quietly, she heard it, a small sound, barely more than a breath. She turned. Samuel stood in the doorway, still wearing his nightshirt, his two large eyes fixed on her face. He held something in his small hand, a wooden horse worn smooth by much handling. Clara didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. The boy took one step into the kitchen, then another. He moved like he expected the floor to give way beneath him, each step a test of faith. He stopped a few feet from her, clutching his horse. Did you save me some? His voice was barely a whisper, but it was a voice. He'd spoken, to her, a stranger. Clara felt something shift in her chest, some wall she hadn't known she'd built beginning to crack. I did, she said softly. It's on the stove, keeping warm. She turned her back on him, a calculated risk, giving him space, showing him she trusted him not to run, and prepared a small plate. She set it on the table, then moved away, busying herself with organizing the pantry. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the clink of a fork on a plate, the small sounds of a child eating. When she turned back around, the plate was empty and Samuel was gone. But on the table, carefully positioned where she couldn't miss it, was the wooden horse. A gift. A thank you. A beginning. Clara picked it up, running her thumb over the smooth wood, and smiled. Yes, the first week passed in careful silence. Clara learned the rhythms of the house, the invisible currents that moved beneath the surface. She learned that Jace woke before dawn to do the heavy chores his father should have handled, that Beth woke second to help the younger children dress and wash, that Marcus hid in the barn whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm him, seeking refuge in the company of animals and books, that Caroline drew pictures when she thought no one was watching, dark, violent sketches of horses and storms and a woman with no face, that Thomas collected rocks, his pockets always full of pebbles he deemed somehow significant, that Samuel spoke perhaps 10 words a day, and only when absolutely necessary. She learned that Silas Mercer existed in the house like a ghost, present but not participating. He ate the meals she cooked without comment. He nodded when she asked questions. He worked from before sunrise to well after dark, coming in only when exhaustion drove him indoors. He was, she realized, waiting to die. Not actively. He still performed the necessary functions of living, still ran the ranch with mechanical competence. But there was no light in him, no spark of interest in anything beyond the next task. And she learned quickly that Jace had been telling the truth. The town didn't want her here. It started small. The supply delivery that should have come on Monday arrived on Thursday, half the goods missing. When Jace went to town to complain, he was told there had been a misunderstanding. The missing items would arrive next week. Maybe. Then the milk delivery stopped entirely. No explanation, no warning, just silence. Clara sent Jace back to town with a note, requesting clarification. He returned with a curt message from the dairy. We no longer service the Mercer Ranch. It's her, Jace said, slamming the note on the table. His hands were shaking with suppressed rage. Eleanor Graves, she owns half the town, and she's decided. He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Clara had heard the name before, dropped in careful conversation by Beth. Eleanor Graves was a widow, a rich widow who'd inherited her husband's considerable holdings and had proceeded to double them through shrewd business and ruthless social maneuvering. She was, by all accounts, a woman who got what she wanted. And apparently, what she wanted was Silas Mercer. Or rather, she wanted the Mercer Ranch, and the easiest way to get it was to marry the man who owned it. The fact that he'd shown no interest was, Clara gathered, merely a temporary obstacle. Every woman who'd come to work at the ranch had been Eleanor's enemy by default, and Eleanor had considerable resources to deploy against her enemies. "What did the others do?" Claire asked. When she started pushing, Jace's laugh was bitter. "They left. All of them. Some lasted 2 weeks, some lasted 2 days. The longest was a month, and that was only because she was too stubborn to admit defeat." He looked at Clara with eyes far too old for his face. "You'll leave too. They all do. It's easier than fighting her." Clara thought of her empty house 3 states away, the neighbors who'd stopped calling, the job offers that had dried up after word spread that she was difficult, the long, quiet evenings with nothing but her own thoughts for company. "I'm not leaving," she said. Jace stared at her. "You don't understand. She can make it impossible. She can—" "I understand perfectly," Clara interrupted. "She's a bully with money and influence, and she's used to getting her way. I've met women like her before." She folded the note carefully, precisely, as if it were something valuable rather than a declaration of war. "The trick is not to blink first. You can't fight her." "I'm not planning to fight her." Clara met his eyes. "I'm planning to stay. There's a difference." She didn't explain, and Jace didn't ask. But something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. A soldier accepting orders from a general who might actually know what she was doing. Clara had been at the ranch for exactly 10 days when Caroline left her first drawing where Clara would find it. It was crude. A stick figure woman standing in front of a stove, surrounded by smaller stick figures. But the woman's face had features now, eyes, a mouth that curved upward. Clara found it tucked under her pillow, discovered when she went to bed after a long day of cooking and cleaning and quietly, persistently existing in a house that had forgotten how to live. She studied the drawing by candlelight, this small offering from a 10-year-old girl who didn't trust easily. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in the small wooden box on the windowsill, the box that held the few things she considered precious. A letter from her grandmother, written 2 weeks before she died. A photograph of her late husband, young and smiling, taken before the war changed him. A pressed flower from their wedding day. And now, a child's drawing. The next morning, Caroline found a sketch waiting at her breakfast plate. Clara had drawn it the night before, working by dim candlelight. A girl with wild hair standing on a hill, surrounded by horses running free. Caroline stared at it for a long moment. Then very carefully, she folded it and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't say thank you, didn't smile. But when she finished her breakfast and stood to leave, she paused beside Clara's chair. "They're not just any horses," she said softly. "They're Mustangs. Wild ones." "I know," Clara said. Caroline nodded and walked away. But Clara saw her touch her pocket once, protective, making sure the drawing was still there. It was Marcus who came to her with the question. He'd been watching her for days, she knew, really watching, with the intensity of someone conducting research. She'd catch him in doorways, in corners, his book forgotten while he studied her movements, her habits, her responses to the children's careful tests. He approached her in the kitchen one afternoon while she was kneading bread. The others were outside except for Samuel, who was napping upstairs, and the house was quiet in the way that invited confidences. "Why are you here?" he asked without preamble. Clara didn't stop kneading. The dough required attention, a specific rhythm of pushing and folding that couldn't be interrupted. "I needed work. You needed a cook." "That's not what I mean." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping. "The others left because of Mrs. Graves, because she made it too hard, too uncomfortable. But you knew about that before you even got here, didn't you? Someone must have told you. Nobody takes a job this far from town, this isolated, unless they're running from something or they have nowhere else to go." Smart boy. Too smart, maybe. He'd learned to see through polite fictions, to recognize the spaces between words where truth hid. You're right, Clara said. I knew. So why? She shaped the dough into a ball, covered it with a damp cloth, and set it aside to rise. Then she washed her hands and turned to face him. Because, she said, everywhere else I went, people wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less. She dried her hands on her apron. They wanted a cook who would cook and nothing else. No opinions, no observations, no presence. And for a while I tried. I tried to make myself fit into spaces that weren't built for me. She met his eyes. But I was terrible at it, and I got tired of apologizing for existing. Marcus absorbed this. So you came here because you didn't have anywhere else to go. I came here, Clara corrected gently, because I decided I'd rather be unwanted in a place that needs me than tolerated in a place that doesn't. He thought about that for a long time, his young face serious. Finally he said, Mrs. Graves is going to make you leave. She always does. Maybe. You could just go now. Before it gets bad. Before she really starts. I could, Clara agreed, but I'm not going to. Why not? Because she'd seen the way Samuel ate his dinner now, sitting at the table instead of hidden away. Because Beth had asked her opinion on a dress pattern yesterday, a small question that acknowledged Clara's judgment mattered. Because Thomas had started telling her about his rocks, elaborate stories about where they came from and what adventures they'd had. Because Caroline drew her pictures and left them like breadcrumbs, a trail leading toward trust. Because Jace, fierce, protective Jace, had stopped watching her like she was about to bolt and started watching her like she might actually be an ally. Because this broken house was starting to breathe again, and Clara had learned that breathing was precious, that life, even hard life, was worth fighting for. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said simply, because I promised myself I wouldn't run anymore, and I keep my promises. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and left the kitchen. She found the result the next day, a journal entry, written in his careful hand and left on her pillow, much like Caroline's drawing had been. It read, Day 10. The new cook is still here. Jace says she won't last. Beth thinks she's kind, but won't say so out loud. Caroline drew her 3 times. Thomas gave her his favorite rock, the blue one with white stripes. Samuel speaks to her. Pa hasn't noticed yet, or if he has, he hasn't said. I think she's going to stay. I don't know why I think that, but I do. Clara read it twice, then placed it in the box with Caroline's drawing and the other things she couldn't bear to lose. The second week ended with fire. Not literal fire, not yet, but the kind that burned just as hot. Confrontation. Jace had gone to town for supplies. He returned 3 hours later than expected, his face white with barely controlled rage, driving an empty wagon. Clara was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, when she heard the wheels crunch on the gravel drive. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun. Jace jumped down from the wagon seat and stalked toward the house. But before he could reach the door, his father emerged, drawn by some instinct that penetrated even his grief-fueled isolation. Where's the supplies? Silas asked. Gone. Jace's voice was tight. Confiscated. Mrs. Graves told the general store we had outstanding debts. They wouldn't sell to me until they're paid. What debts? Silas's tone sharpened. We don't owe them anything. I paid in full last month. I know. I showed them the receipt. Didn't matter. Jace yanked off his hat and threw it on the ground. She's got them scared, Pa. All of them. Nobody in town will sell to us. Not food, not supplies, nothing. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was it then, the real attack, the one designed to force her out, not through discomfort, but through necessity. If they couldn't buy food, couldn't maintain the ranch, then she was useless here. Might as well leave. Except, she walked over to where the 2 men stood, both radiating fury and helplessness in equal measure. How much do we have left? She asked calmly. In the pantry, the cellar, the stores. Jace looked at her like she'd asked him to calculate the distance to the moon. I don't know. A week? Maybe 2 if we're careful? Show me. Clara turned toward the house. Everything Every jar, every sack, every bin. I need to see what we're working with. What's the point? Jace's frustration spilled over. We can't make food appear out of nothing. We can't. Show me, Clara repeated, and something in her voice made him stop arguing. They took inventory. It was worse than she'd feared. Flour, maybe enough for one more baking. Sugar, nearly gone. Coffee, dregs, salt, adequate. Beans, half a sack. Potatoes, a bushel, starting to sprout. Canned goods, maybe a dozen jars of last year's preserves. Some questionable-looking tomatoes, and a suspicious jar of what might have been pickles once. The garden was producing, but not enough to feed 7 children and 3 adults. The chickens provided eggs, but half of them had stopped laying. There was a cow, but she was old and her milk production was declining. In short, they had days, not weeks. Clara stood in the cellar, surrounded by the evidence of their precarious situation, and felt a familiar anger begin to build. Not the hot, explosive kind that burned fast and left nothing but ash. The cold, patient kind that could sustain itself for years. Eleanor Graves wanted her gone. Fine. Most people did, eventually. But Eleanor Graves was willing to starve children to achieve that goal, was willing to weaponize the town's merchants, to use money and influence to harm innocent people. That, Clara would not tolerate. She climbed out of the cellar to find Silas waiting. He'd followed them down, silent, but she could see something stirring behind his eyes. Not quite life, not yet, but the possibility of it. We'll make it work, she said. How? It wasn't sarcasm. It was a genuine question, asked by a man who'd forgotten how to solve problems. I'll figure it out. Clara brushed dirt off her skirt. But I need to know something first. Do you want me to leave? Silas frowned. What? It's a simple question. Mrs. Graves is doing this to force me out. If I leave now, she'll stop. The stores will sell to you again. Everything goes back to whatever it was before I came. She met his eyes. So I'm asking, do you want me to leave? The silence stretched. Jace held his breath. Somewhere in the house, Clara could hear the younger children moving around, unaware that their future was being decided in a dusty cellar entrance. No, Silas said finally. The word sounded rusty, like he wasn't used to making decisions anymore. No, you stay. Why? He looked away, jaw working. Because they've started talking again. Laughing. Because Samuel's eating. Because Beth asked me yesterday what I thought about... He stopped, shook his head. Because you being here makes this feel like a house instead of a tomb. It was the most words Clara had heard him string together. The most emotion she'd seen him show. All right then, she said. Then we fight. How? Jace asked. We can't win against her. She controls everything. Clara smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd been pushed too far, too many times, and had finally decided to push back. She controls the town, Clara said. She doesn't control the land, and she certainly doesn't control me. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn and went hunting. She'd learned to shoot as a girl, taught by her father who'd believed daughters should be as capable as sons. She was rusty. It had been years since she'd held a rifle, but the basic skills were still there, buried under layers of civilized living. Silas had a hunting rifle. She borrowed it without asking, knowing that asking would prompt questions she didn't have time to answer. The land around the ranch was wild, sparsely populated, full of rabbits and quail, and the occasional deer. Clara moved through it with the careful silence of someone who understood that survival sometimes meant taking life. She brought down 2 rabbits before the sun was fully up. By the time the children woke, she had them skinned, cleaned, and simmering in a pot with the last of the potatoes and some wild onions she'd found growing near the creek. The children ate without knowing they were eating rebellion. That afternoon, Clara took Beth and Caroline into the garden and showed them how to identify edible wild plants. Dandelion greens, bitter but nutritious. Lamb's quarters, good raw or cooked. Wild asparagus, if you knew where to look. We're going to supplement, Clara told them. Everything we can't buy, we find. Everything we can't find, we grow. And everything we can't grow, we do without. For how long? Beth asked quietly. For as long as it takes. That evening, Clara sent Marcus to the neighboring ranches, not to beg, but to trade. They had eggs the neighbors didn't. They had Beth's sewing skills. They had Jace's ability to fix machinery and Silas's knowledge of animal husbandry. "We're not asking for charity," Clara instructed. "We're offering fair trade, eggs for flour, sewing for sugar, labor for coffee." It worked. Not perfectly, not abundantly, but enough. Enough to survive. The merchants in Eleanor Graves's pocket wouldn't sell to them. Fine. Clara would build a new economy, one that didn't require their participation. On the 14th night, something shifted. The children were in bed. Silas was in his study, reviewing accounts by lamplight. He'd started doing that again, Clara had noticed, taking interest in the ranch's finances for the first time in months. Clara was in the kitchen, baking bread with the flour Marcus had traded 3 dozen eggs for. The dough was rising, the stove was warm, and the house was quiet in a way that felt almost peaceful. She heard footsteps on the stairs, light ones, child-sized. Lily appeared in the doorway. Clara had seen the 5-year-old in passing, of course, had served her meals, had watched her play quietly in corners, always alone, always silent, but they'd never spoken. Lily, Beth had explained, hadn't said a word since her mother died. Not one. The doctor said there was nothing physically wrong with her. She just chose silence. Now she stood in the kitchen, wearing a nightgown too big for her small frame, her dark hair tangled from sleep. Clara didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Lily crossed the kitchen with the fearless certainty of very young children. She stopped directly in front of Clara and held up her arms. It was unmistakable, universal, the gesture every child makes when they want to be held. Clara's throat tightened. She wiped the flour from her hands and bent down, lifting the small girl into her arms. Lily wrapped her arms around Clara's neck and buried her face in her shoulder. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just held on, a small creature seeking warmth and safety in a world that had proven itself cold and dangerous. Clara held her, swaying slightly, the way mothers do. She didn't try to fill the silence with words, didn't ask questions or make promises. She just held this child who had chosen, for reasons of her own, to trust her. After a long time, Lily pulled back. She looked at Clara with serious dark eyes. Then, very clearly, she spoke. "Stay." One word. The first she'd said in 2 years. Clara felt something break open in her chest, some reservoir of emotion she'd been carefully controlling. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." Lily nodded, satisfied, and laid her head back on Clara's shoulder. They stood there in the warm kitchen while bread rose and the future hung in the balance, and a promise was made that would change everything. When Beth came looking for her sister 20 minutes later, she found them still there. Clara in her flour-dusted apron, holding Lily with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd just been given something precious and breakable. "She spoke," Clara said quietly. Beth's hand flew to her mouth. "What did she say?" "She asked me to stay." "What did you tell her?" Clara met Beth's eyes over Lily's small head. "I told her yes." Beth absorbed this. Then, very slowly, she smiled. It was a real smile, the first Clara had seen from her, bright and young and full of hope that had been buried so deep Beth had probably forgotten it was there. "Good," Beth said, "because we need you." On. The countdown had begun, though Clara didn't know it yet. Somewhere in town, Eleanor Graves was receiving reports. The new cook was still there. She'd found ways around the embargo. She was settling in, becoming integral, bonding with the children. Unacceptable. Eleanor Graves had not become one of the wealthiest women in the territory by accepting defeat. She'd done it by being willing to do whatever was necessary, by understanding that power was about leverage and that everyone had a breaking point. The cook would have hers, they always did. And Eleanor Graves was very good at finding breaking points. But that would come later. For now, in a ranch house that had forgotten how to be a home, 7 children and 1 stubborn woman were building something fragile and precious, the beginning of trust. Clara checked on the bread one last time, then carried Lily upstairs. She tucked her into bed beside Caroline, who was already asleep, and smoothed the dark hair back from her forehead. "Sweet dreams," she whispered. Lily's eyes were already closing, but her small hand caught Clara's, held it for just a moment. Then she let go, and Clara left her there, sleeping peacefully in a house that was slowly coming back to life. Downstairs, the bread finished rising. In his study, Silas made a note in his ledger and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like the numbers might actually add up to something. In the barn, Jace finished his evening chores and paused, listening to the sound of his siblings settling down for the night. Real settling, peaceful, not the tense, unhappy silence they'd lived with for so long. And in her small bed in the room she shared with Beth and Caroline, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and thought about promises. She'd made one to Lily tonight. "I'll stay." The question was whether she'd be able to keep it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening. The real fight was about to begin. The rain came 3 days later, turning the roads to mud and the sky to slate. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching water sheet down the glass, and felt the first prickle of unease at the base of her spine. It wasn't the storm that worried her. It was the silence from town. Jace had made 2 more trading runs to neighboring ranches, returning each time with enough supplies to keep them going, barely. But the careful network Clara was building felt fragile, like a spider web that could be torn apart with one careless swipe. She was stirring a pot of bean soup when Beth appeared at her elbow, so quietly Clara nearly jumped. "There's a wagon coming," Beth said, her voice tight with worry. Clara set down the spoon and moved to the front window. Through the rain, she could make out a covered wagon making its slow way up the drive, pulled by 2 horses that looked as miserable as the weather. "Go get your father," Clara said. "And Jace." Beth disappeared. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and opened the front door, stepping onto the porch despite the rain that immediately began soaking her skirt. The wagon pulled to a stop. The driver was a woman, maybe 60, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be permanently skeptical. She didn't get down, just sat there holding the reins, water dripping from the brim of her hat. "You the cook?" she called over the sound of rain. "I am." "Figures." The woman spat to the side. "I'm Mabel Hutchins. Run the boarding house in town. Got a delivery for you." Clara's unease deepened. "We didn't order anything." "Didn't say you did." Mabel climbed down from the wagon with the stiff movements of someone whose joints had stopped cooperating years ago. She moved to the back of the wagon and untied the canvas cover. "Someone paid me to bring this out. Wouldn't say who, but the money was good and I don't ask questions when the money's good." She pulled back the canvas to reveal crates of supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, dried beans, canned goods, everything they needed and more. Clara's throat tightened. "Who sent this?" "Told you wouldn't say, but I got eyes." Mabel's gaze was sharp despite her age. "Someone in town doesn't agree with what Eleanor Graves is doing. Someone with enough money to make a difference, but not enough power to do it openly." She started hauling a crate toward the porch. "You going to help me unload or just stand there gawking?" Clara moved, grabbing the other end of the crate. It was heavy, substantial, real. Silas and Jace appeared as they were carrying the second crate. Both men stopped dead at the sight of the supplies. "What's this?" Silas demanded. "Providence," Mabel said dryly. "Or charity, or rebellion. Take your pick." She fixed him with a look that could have stripped paint. "You always this ungracious when someone helps you, Mercer?" Something flickered in Silas's face. Embarrassment, maybe, or the ghost of the man he used to be before grief hollowed him out. "I just need to know who to thank." "Then you'll be waiting a while." Mabel handed him a crate. "My advice? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You need this, they can afford to give it, and Eleanor Graves can go hang for all I care." They unloaded in silence, moving supplies into the house while rain hammered the roof and turned the yard into a lake. When the wagon was empty, Mabel climbed back up to the driver's seat, water streaming from her coat. "One more thing," she said, looking directly at Clara. "Meeting next week, town council. Eleanor is going to propose new regulations about hiring practices, specifically requiring all domestic workers to register with a central authority, which she happens to control." Clara felt her jaw tighten. "Let me guess. She'll deny my registration." "Smart girl." Mabel gathered the reins. "She's making it official, making it legal. So when you leave, it won't be because she forced you out. It'll be because you broke the law." "When do I leave?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Mabel almost smiled. "Good. You got some steel in you. You're gonna need it." She clicked her tongue at the horses. "Meeting's Thursday at 2. Public forum, so anyone can attend, if you're still here by then." The wagon pulled away, disappearing into the rain. Clara stood on the porch, watching it go, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on her shoulders like a yoke. "You should leave," Jay said from behind her. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the fear underneath. "Before the meeting, before she makes it impossible." Clara turned to look at him. At Silas standing beside him, water dripping from his hat. At Beth and Marcus and Thomas and Caroline and Samuel, all crowded in the doorway, listening. "No," she said simply. "She'll win." Jace's control cracked. "She always wins, and we'll be right back where we started, except this time—" He stopped, jaw working. "This time it'll be worse, because they got used to you. They got used to having someone who—" He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Clara crossed the porch and put her hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "Listen to me," she said, low enough that only he and Silas could hear. "I've spent my whole life leaving places because someone decided I didn't belong. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of letting bullies make my decisions for me." She squeezed his shoulder. "I'm not leaving. Not because of Eleanor Graves, not because of regulations, not because of anything except my own choice. Do you understand?" Jace stared at her. "You're going to fight her." "I'm going to stay," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." Silas made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Clara admitted. She let go of Jace's shoulder and started gathering the wet crates. "Now help me get these inside before the rain ruins everything." They worked together, moving supplies into the pantry, and if Clara noticed that the children stayed closer than usual for the rest of the day, if she saw how Thomas kept finding excuses to be in the kitchen, how Caroline drew 3 pictures and left them all on Clara's pillow, how Samuel held onto the hem of her skirt while she cooked dinner, well, she didn't say anything. But she felt it. The weight of what she was promising. The impossibility of what she was choosing. And late that night, alone in the room she shared with Beth and the girls, she opened the small wooden box and looked at the things she'd collected. Her grandmother's letter, her husband's photograph, the pressed flower from her wedding, Caroline's drawings, Marcus's journal entry, and now, folded carefully, the note from the anonymous benefactor, because Mabel had slipped it to her when the men weren't looking. "Stay. Some of us believe in what you're doing." Clara closed the box and lay down in the darkness, listening to Beth's quiet breathing, to Caroline's small snores, to the rain still falling outside. The countdown had begun in earnest now. She had until Thursday. The days between the wagon's arrival and the town council meeting passed in a strange suspension of time. Clara cooked. She cleaned. She taught the children how to preserve food, how to make soap from ash and fat, how to stretch supplies that might need to last longer than expected. But underneath the normal rhythms, tension built like pressure before a storm. It was Marcus who finally asked the question they were all thinking. "What are you going to do?" He'd cornered her in the barn where she'd gone to collect eggs. "At the meeting, I mean, when Mrs. Graves tries to make you leave." Clara set down the basket of eggs and looked at him. Really looked. This boy who'd started keeping detailed notes about everything that happened in the house, who wrote with the careful precision of someone who believed that if you could document something, you could understand it. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said. "What truth?" "That she's trying to control your father by controlling who works on this ranch. That she's weaponizing the law to serve her own interests. That she's hurting children to get what she wants." Clara picked up the basket again. "And then I'm going to ask the council if that's the kind of town they want to be." Marcus's eyes widened. "You can't say that. She'll destroy you." "Maybe." Clara started back toward the house. "But I can't fight her by being quiet. That's what she expects. That I'll be intimidated into silence. So I'm going to do the opposite." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." Clara stopped walking, turned to face him. "You know what I've learned, Marcus? Bullies rely on other people's fear. They need you to believe they're invincible. But the moment you stop being afraid, the moment you stand up and call them out, they lose their power. She shifted the basket to her other hip. Eleanor Graves has money and influence, but I have something she doesn't. What? The truth. And people who are starting to care about what happens to this family. She thought of Mabel Hutchins, of the anonymous benefactor, of the neighboring ranchers who'd started trading with them despite the risks. I'm not as alone as she thinks I am. Marcus absorbed this with the seriousness of someone twice his age. What if you're wrong? What if nobody stands up for you? Then I'll stand alone, Clara said, and at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. She left him there, standing in the barn doorway, and didn't see the way he pulled out his journal and began writing furiously, documenting everything, bearing witness to something he didn't yet understand but recognized as important. Done. Wednesday evening, the night before the meeting, Silas found Clara in the garden. She was pulling weeds by the last light of day, her hands dark with soil, her back aching from hours of bending. Need to talk to you, he said without preamble. Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. All right. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there, a man who'd forgotten how to have conversations that mattered. Finally, he said, You don't have to do this. Do what? Fight her. Go to that meeting. He looked away toward the mountains turning purple in the fading light. You could leave tonight. I'd pay you what you're owed, give you a reference. You could find another position somewhere Eleanor Graves doesn't have reach. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me, Clara said quietly. Silas flinched. Why? Because this is your house, your children, your decision. She stood brushing dirt from her skirt. I told you when I came here that I wouldn't leave just because someone told me to. But if you're asking me to go, if you genuinely believe it would be better for your family, then I'll respect that. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the house, one of the children laughed, a sound that had been absent for so long it felt almost foreign. They need you, Silas said finally. His voice was rough, like the words were being pulled from somewhere deep. I didn't realize how much until I saw them with you, saw them start to... He stopped, shook his head. My wife was a good mother, a good woman. And when she died, I thought that was it, that we'd just exist until the children were grown and then I could... He didn't finish, but Clara understood, until I could stop existing too. But you're still here, she said. Barely. He finally looked at her. You're making them live again, making this house feel like it could be something other than a memorial. His hands clenched into fists. But I can't protect you from Eleanor, can't stop what she's going to try to do. I'm not asking you to protect me, Clara said. I'm asking you to let me stay, to let me fight. Why? The question burst from him. Why does this matter so much? You barely know us. You could go anywhere, work for anyone. Why risk everything for a family of strangers? Clara thought about that, about all the places she'd left, all the times she'd been told she was too much or not enough, about the slow erosion of self that came from constantly apologizing for existing. Because, she said slowly, for the first time in years, I feel like I belong somewhere, like what I do matters, like she struggled for the right words, like I'm enough exactly as I am. She met his eyes. Your children did that. This house did that. And I'm not willing to give that up without a fight. Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, his lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't completely devoid of warmth either. You're a stubborn woman, Clara Whitlock. So I've been told. And you're going to that meeting tomorrow. I am. He nodded slowly. Then I'm coming with you. Clara blinked. What? You think I'm going to let you face Eleanor Graves alone? Something shifted in his face, a flash of the man he used to be, the one who'd built this ranch from nothing, who'd married and raised children and believed in a future. She wants to control what happens on my land, with my family. Maybe it's time I reminded her whose ranch this is. For the first time since Clara had arrived, she saw real fire in Silas Mercer's eyes. All right then, she said. We go together. They stood there in the gathering darkness, Two people who'd been running from different things, who'd found themselves in the same place at the same impossible moment. "One condition," Silas said. "What's that?" "You cook breakfast before we leave. Can't fight on an empty stomach." Clara laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising her. "Deal." Thursday morning broke clear and cold. Clara woke before dawn, made breakfast as promised, eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, thick slices of bread with butter, and watched the children eat with the careful attention of someone memorizing a moment. Beth had pressed Clara's best dress the night before, the dark blue one with buttons up the front. Caroline had drawn a picture of a woman standing tall in front of a crowd, left it on the breakfast table without comment. Marcus wrote in his journal throughout the meal, documenting everything. Thomas gave Clara his favorite rock, the blue one with white stripes, and told her it was for luck. Samuel climbed into her lap and stayed there while she ate, his small body warm and trusting. Only Jace was silent. He sat at his usual place, eating mechanically, his face a mask. When breakfast was done and Clara stood to clear the dishes, he finally spoke. "Don't go." Everyone froze. Jace's hands were shaking. "Please, just don't go. We can figure something else out. We can—" "Jace," Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "She's going to win." His control shattered. "And then you'll leave like all the others, and we'll be right back where we started, except worse because we—" He stopped, breath hitching. "Because we let ourselves hope." Clara crossed to where he sat and knelt beside his chair so they were at eye level. "Listen to me. I am not like the others. I'm not leaving because Eleanor Graves says so. I'm not leaving because some regulation tells me to. The only way I leave this house is if your father asks me to go, or if you, all of you, decide you don't want me here anymore." She put her hand over his. "Do you want me to go?" "No?" The word was barely a whisper. "Then I'm staying, no matter what happens today." "You can't promise that." "Watch me." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly, fingers tightening around hers for just a moment before he pulled away. Clara stood, straightened her dress, looked at Silas, who was waiting by the door. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Clara said honestly. "But let's go anyway." The town council met in a building that doubled as the church on Sundays, and a general gathering place the rest of the week. By the time Clara and Silas arrived, it was already half full. Merchants and ranchers and townspeople who'd come to witness whatever Eleanor Graves had planned. Clara felt every eye turned toward her as she entered, heard the whispers start, the speculative murmurs. She kept her chin up, her shoulders back, and walked to the front row where seats had been reserved for those directly affected by agenda items. Eleanor Graves sat at the head table with the 4 council members, 3 men and 1 woman, all prosperous-looking, all clearly uncomfortable with whatever was about to happen. Eleanor herself was everything Clara had imagined, and worse. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair styled in elaborate waves, a dress that cost more than Clara made in 6 months, and eyes like chips of ice. Beautiful once, probably, before ambition had hardened her features into something colder than mere prettiness. She looked at Clara the way someone might look at an insect that needed squashing. "So glad you could join us, Miss Whitlock," Eleanor said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "I was afraid you might have moved on by now." "It's Mrs. Whitlock," Clara said evenly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that." The meeting was called to order. There were several items of minor business first: approvals for building permits, discussion of road maintenance, a dispute over water rights that got heated before being tabled for further review. Then Eleanor stood. "I'd like to propose a new regulation," she said, addressing the council, but clearly performing for the audience. One designed to protect the women of this community and ensure appropriate working conditions for all domestic employees. She laid out her proposal with the smooth confidence of someone who'd rehearsed extensively. All domestic workers would need to register with a central authority. They would need references from at least 2 previous employers. They would need to undergo a character review, and they would need to work in households deemed appropriate and safe by the authority. The authority, of course, would be a board Eleanor controlled. "This is about safety," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping false concern. About making sure vulnerable women aren't placed in questionable situations. Isolated ranches, far from town, with no oversight or protection. She looked directly at Clara. We've all heard stories. Women who arrive with murky pasts, who refuse to provide references, who insert themselves into families during times of weakness and grief. The implication was clear. Clara was a predator, taking advantage of a widower and his children. Clara felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and demanding release. But she stayed seated, stayed silent, let Eleanor keep talking. I propose, Eleanor said, that we require immediate registration of all current domestic workers. Any who fail to provide adequate documentation within 1 week will be required to cease employment immediately. She sat down, satisfaction radiating from her like heat from a stove. The council shifted uncomfortably. The chairman, a portly man named William Hayes, cleared his throat. Mrs. Graves, while we appreciate your concern for worker safety, this seems rather targeted. Targeted at protecting our community, Eleanor said smoothly. Surely you can't object to that, William. I object. The voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Mabel Hutchins stood leaning on her cane, glaring at the council with undisguised disgust. This isn't about protecting anyone. This is about Eleanor Graves trying to control who Silas Mercer employs so she can force him into a marriage he doesn't want. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's face went white, then red. That is a slanderous accusation. It's the truth, and everyone in this room knows it. Mabel pointed her cane at Eleanor like a weapon. You've been chasing that man for 2 years, driving away every woman who tries to help him. And why? Because you want his land, his ranch, his name. She spat to the side as if cleaning a bad taste from her mouth. This regulation is just your latest scheme, dressed up in legal language. Eleanor stood, vibrating with rage. I will not be spoken to. Sit down, Eleanor. Another voice, this one from the left side of the room. A man stood, tall, lean, wearing the clothes of a working rancher. Clara didn't recognize him, but others clearly did. More whispers. James Morrison, the chairman said, surprised. We weren't expecting. I'm here because I heard what was being proposed. James looked at Eleanor with undisguised contempt. My ranch borders the Mercer property. I've been trading with them for the past 2 weeks, and I've met Mrs. Whitlock. She's a decent woman doing honest work. This regulation is a transparent attempt to punish her for refusing to be intimidated. Hear, hear, someone else called. More people stood, ranchers, merchants, even a few townspeople Clara didn't know. Eleanor's confident smile was starting to crack. This is highly irregular. What's irregular, a woman's voice cut in, is using your position on this council to settle personal grudges. The female council member was speaking now, Anna Brennan, owner of the town's textile mill. I've sat through a lot of questionable proposals, Eleanor, but this one crosses a line. You're not protecting anyone. You're weaponizing regulations to serve your own interests. I resent the truth? Mabel asked sweetly. Yeah, I bet you do. The chairman banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but the room was in chaos now. People were shouting, arguing, years of resentment toward Eleanor Graves boiling over into open confrontation. And through it all, Clara sat silent. She hadn't said a word, hadn't needed to. Because other people, people she barely knew, people who had no obligation to defend her, were doing it for her. Eleanor's face was a mask of fury. She rounded on Clara. You, she hissed. You think you've won? You think these people will protect you? Clara stood slowly. The room quieted. I don't need them to protect me, she said, her voice carrying clearly. I need them to tell the truth, which they just did. She stepped closer to Eleanor, ignoring the gasps, the tension crackling through the air. You're right about one thing, Clara said. I did arrive with a murky past. I don't have glowing references. I am exactly the kind of woman you're trying to keep out. She smiled, and it wasn't kind. Because I don't bow to bullies. I don't apologize for taking up space. And I don't leave just because someone with money and influence tells me to. Eleanor's jaw tightened. You have no idea what I can do. I know exactly what you can do, Clara interrupted. You can make life difficult. You can close doors. You can turn people against me. She moved even closer, close enough to see the rage and fear warring in Eleanor's eyes. But here's what you can't do. You can't make me afraid of you. You can't make me abandon those children. And you can't control who Silas Mercer chooses to employ on his own land. The law requires equal application, Anna Brennan said from the council table. If we're going to regulate domestic workers, it applies to everyone in town, including your staff, Eleanor, including the workers at all the businesses represented on this council. As she looked at her fellow members, are we prepared to implement that level of oversight across the entire community? Silence. The male council members shifted uncomfortably. They all employed people. They all had staff who wouldn't pass Eleanor's proposed scrutiny. I thought not, Anna said dryly. She turned to Eleanor. Your proposal is denied, unanimously. She looked at the other council members who nodded quickly, eager to be on the right side of this. Meeting adjourned. The gavel came down. Eleanor stood frozen, shock and rage twisting her features. She looked at Clara with pure hatred. This isn't over, she said quietly, meant for Clara's ears alone. No, Clara agreed. It probably isn't. But you lost today, and that's enough for now. She turned and walked out of the building, Silas close behind her, and didn't look back. They made it halfway home before Clara started shaking. Silas noticed immediately, pulling the wagon to the side of the road. You all right? I stood up to her. Clara's voice was wondering, almost disbelieving. I actually stood up to Eleanor Graves and people defended me. You're surprised? I'm shocked. She looked at her hands, still trembling. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much, too loud, too opinionated, too difficult. And today, when it mattered most, people stood up and said I was enough exactly as I am. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, you were right. What you said about belonging, about this house, these children. He picked up the reins but didn't signal the horses to move yet. I stopped fighting after Sarah died. Stopped believing anything could change. Just existed, waiting for it to be over. And now? Now I'm angry. He said it like it was a revelation. I'm angry that Eleanor thought she could control my life. Angry that I let her get this far. Angry that my children have been living in a tomb because I couldn't figure out how to live in a house. Clara waited. You did that, Silas said. You made me angry enough to care again. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It is. He clicked his tongue at the horses, setting them moving again. Anger's better than numbness. At least anger means you're still alive. They rode in silence for a while, the ranch drawing closer with each turn of the wheels. She meant what she said, Clara finally spoke. About this not being over. I know. She's going to retaliate. Find another way to hurt us. Probably. Silas's jaw was set. But this time I'll be ready. This time I'll fight back. Clara thought about Eleanor's face, the rage and humiliation and wounded pride. Women like that didn't forgive, didn't forget. But she also thought about Mabel Hutchins standing up in that meeting, about James Morrison and Anna Brennan and all the others who'd spoken in her defense, about a community that had looked at Eleanor Graves's power and said, not this time. We'll face it together, Clara said. Whatever comes next. Together, Silas agreed. The ranch appeared on the horizon, and Clara could see the children waiting on the porch, all 7 of them, anxious and hopeful and terrified. When the wagon pulled up, they swarmed like bees, asking questions all at once, grabbing at Clara and Silas, needing reassurance. We won, Clara said simply. The children erupted in cheers. Beth hugged her. Thomas did a little dance. Caroline grabbed her hand and squeezed. Even Jace allowed himself a small smile. Only Samuel was quiet. He stood apart, watching with those 2 old eyes, and Clara wondered what he understood that the others didn't yet. That victory was temporary, that Eleanor Graves wouldn't stop, that the real fight was just beginning, but that would come later. For now, they celebrated. Clara cooked a feast that night, using the supplies from the mysterious benefactor, cooking with the freedom of someone who didn't have to ration every ingredient. She made roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread and a pie with the last of the preserved peaches. They ate together, all of them, even Silas fully present for the first time. They told stories, they laughed. They were, for one evening, something close to a family. And late that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara stood in the kitchen and looked out at the darkened land. She'd won the battle. But Eleanor Graves was right about one thing. This wasn't over, not even close. The warning came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the council meeting, a boy appeared at the ranch just after dawn. He couldn't have been more than 10, riding a horse too big for him, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. Clara was collecting eggs when she heard the commotion, Jace's sharp voice, the sound of hoofbeats, then footsteps running toward the house. She dropped the basket and ran. The boy was standing in the kitchen, swaying on his feet, while Jace gripped his shoulders to keep him upright. Silas appeared from upstairs, still buttoning his shirt. "What's happened?" Silas demanded. The boy's words tumbled out in a rush. "My ma sent me. She works at Mrs. Graves's house, cleaning, mostly. She heard things, plans." He gulped air. "Mrs. Graves is coming here, today. She's bringing people. She's going to—" He stopped, looking at Clara with terrified eyes. "She's going to make you leave. For real this time. She said if you won't go willingly, she'll find another way." Clara felt ice settle in her stomach. "What other way?" "I don't know. Ma just said to warn you. Said Mrs. Graves was different after that meeting, angrier than Ma's ever seen her." The boy was shaking now. "She said to tell you to run, to leave before Mrs. Graves gets here." Silas's jaw tightened. "When?" "This afternoon. 2 o'clock, maybe 3. The boy swayed again, and Clara caught him, guiding him to a chair. "Beth," she called, "bring water and some bread. This child needs food." Beth appeared with both, her face frightened but composed. The boy drank gratefully, his hands trembling around the cup. "What's your name?" Clara asked gently. "Peter. Peter Morrison." He looked up at her. "Your pa's the one who spoke at the meeting," she said to him. He nodded. "He told Ma what happened, said you stood up to Mrs. Graves. Ma said—" He hesitated. "Ma said that takes courage. Said someone needed to warn you what was coming." Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the fear. "Thank you, Peter, and thank your mother for me." The boy finished his bread and stood on wobbly legs. "I should go. If Mrs. Graves finds out Ma sent me—" "She won't," Silas said firmly. "We'll say nothing. You were never here." Peter nodded and fled, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the morning. The kitchen fell silent. "You should leave," Jace said quietly. "Take one of the horses and go. Get far enough away that whatever she's planning can't touch you." Clara looked at him. At the fear and resignation already settling into his features, the certainty that this was how it always ended, with the people they cared about disappearing. "No," she said. "Clara, I said no." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not running from Eleanor Graves. I'm not giving her the satisfaction." "This isn't about satisfaction," Silas said, his voice rough. "This is about safety. If she's planning something, if she's bringing people, then let her come." Clara's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Let her come to this house and tell me to my face why I don't belong here. Let her explain to these children why she thinks it's acceptable to destroy their stability for her own ambitions." She looked at each of them, Silas, Jace, Beth, and the younger children who'd started gathering in the doorway. "I'm not leaving. Not today. Not because Eleanor Graves says so." "What if she has the law on her side?" Beth asked, her voice small. "What if she found a way to make it legal?" Clara considered this. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But I won't run from a threat. I won't teach you children that the right response to bullying is to surrender." Jace made a frustrated sound. "This isn't about teaching us anything. This is about survival. It's about both." Clara moved to the stove, began preparing breakfast with hands that were steadier than she felt. And right now, survival means showing Eleanor Graves that she can't scare us into compliance. Silas watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, we stay. We face whatever's coming." He looked at Jace. "Get the children ready. Make sure they're clean, dressed properly. If Eleanor Graves is coming here to make a scene, we'll meet her with dignity." Jace opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He understood what his father was really saying. They would not cower, would not hide, would not give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing them unprepared. The morning passed in tense preparation. Clara cooked a full breakfast, insisting they all eat despite the knots in everyone's stomachs. She cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed. She had the children change into their best clothes, mended and worn, but clean and respectable. Beth braided Caroline's and Lily's hair with shaking hands. Marcus retreated to the barn with his journal, documenting everything. Thomas organized his rock collection and reorganized it, needing something to do with his restless energy. Samuel stayed close to Clara, his small hand gripping her skirt whenever she moved, and all the while, the clock ticked toward afternoon. At 1:30, Jace called from the front window. "Wagon's coming." Clara's heart hammered, but she forced herself to move calmly. She untied her apron, smoothed her dress, and walked to the front door. Silas was already there, his face set in hard lines. "Together," he said quietly. "Together," Clara agreed. They stepped onto the porch as 3 wagons rolled up the drive, kicking up dust in the bright afternoon sun. Eleanor Graves sat in the first one, dressed in black silk that made her look like a judge pronouncing sentence. Behind her were 2 more wagons filled with townspeople, merchants, council members, even a few ranchers Clara recognized from the meeting. But it was the 4th rider that made Clara's blood run cold. A man in a sheriff's uniform, riding a gray horse, his face expressionless beneath his hat. Eleanor climbed down from her wagon with the careful precision of someone staging a performance. She looked at the house, at Silas and Clara standing side by side on the porch, at the children visible through the windows. Her smile was thin and cold. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "I apologize for the intrusion, but this is a matter of some urgency." "State your business," Silas said flatly. Eleanor's smile widened. "I'm here as a concerned member of the community. It's come to my attention that there are children living in this household under conditions that may not be suitable." Clara felt rage flood through her, white-hot and demanding. "Suitable?" "Mrs. Whitlock," Eleanor's voice dripped false sympathy. "I understand you've become quite attached to the Mercer children. But attachment doesn't qualify someone to care for vulnerable young people, especially when that person arrives with no references, no verifiable history, and questionable motives." "My motives are to cook and care for this household," Clara said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Which I've been doing quite well, thank you." "Have you?" Eleanor gestured to the sheriff. "Sheriff Morrison, would you mind conducting an inspection of the premises, just to ensure the children are living in appropriate conditions?" The sheriff, a different Morrison, not related to James as far as Clara could tell, dismounted slowly. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to look around, make sure everything's in order." "No." Silas's voice cracked like a whip. "You're not setting foot in my house without a warrant." "I have one." The sheriff pulled a paper from his coat. "Signed by Judge Harrison this morning. Authorizes me to inspect the premises and remove any children deemed to be in unsafe conditions." Clara's world tilted. This was it then. Eleanor had found a way to make it legal. "Let him look," she said quietly. Silas turned to her, shocked. "Clara." "Let him look," she repeated louder now. "Let him inspect every room, every corner, every inch of this house." She stepped aside from the door. "Because he won't find anything wrong. The children are clean, fed, healthy, and happy. The house is maintained. We have adequate supplies. And if Sheriff Morrison is honest, if he actually looks instead of just confirming what Eleanor Graves wants him to see, he'll report exactly that." The sheriff's face flushed. "Ma'am, I don't take kindly to suggestions that I'd falsify a report." "Then prove me wrong," Clara said. "Do your job honestly." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the sheriff climbed the porch steps and entered the house. The next hour was torture. The sheriff went through every room with Eleanor close behind, her sharp eyes cataloging everything. She pointed out dust on a high shelf, a scuff mark on the floor, a window that stuck when opened. She examined the children's clothes, their bedding, the food in the pantry. "These children sleep 3 to a room," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. "Is that appropriate?" "It's a ranch house, not a mansion," Clara said evenly. The rooms are adequate and the children are comfortable. And this girl, Eleanor pointed to Lily, who shrank back behind Beth. She's quite small for her age. Is she being properly fed? She's 3 years old, Clara said, fighting to keep her voice level. And yes, she's fed. She's small because she was born small, not because of neglect. Eleanor moved through the house like a prosecutor building a case, pointing out every minor imperfection, every sign of wear that came from housing 7 children in a working ranch. But the sheriff, to his credit, was taking actual notes. Clara watched him examine the children's sleeping arrangements, check the food supplies, even crouched down to talk quietly with Marcus and Thomas. He looked in the barn, inspected the well, walked the perimeter of the property. Finally, he returned to the front porch where Eleanor waited with barely concealed impatience. "Well?" she demanded. "You've seen the conditions, the overcrowding, the inadequate supervision, the questionable character of the woman they've hired." "I've seen," the sheriff interrupted, "a clean house with adequate supplies, healthy children, and no evidence of neglect or abuse." He looked at Eleanor with something that might have been disappointment. "Ma'am, I can't remove these children. There's no cause." Eleanor's face went white, then red. "No cause? They're living in a ranch house with their father and a hired cook," the sheriff said firmly, "which is perfectly legal and, from what I can see, perfectly appropriate." He tipped his hat to Silas. "I'll file my report with the judge. Good day." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Eleanor standing in the yard trembling with rage. For a moment, Clara thought she might leave, might accept this defeat and retreat. But Eleanor Graves hadn't become powerful by accepting defeat gracefully. "You," she said, rounding on Clara with venom in her voice. "You think you've won. You think because you fooled a few people, charmed a few children, that you belong here." "I don't think I belong here," Clara said quietly. "I know I do. Because the people in this house want me here." "Want," Eleanor spat the word. "You've made them dependent on you. You've inserted yourself into their grief, exploited their vulnerability. I've cooked their meals and mended their clothes and listened when they needed someone to listen," Clara interrupted. "If that's exploitation, then I'm guilty as charged." Eleanor took a step forward, her composure cracking. "Do you know what you are? You're a parasite, a woman with nowhere else to go, clinging to this family because you're too proud to admit you're unwanted everywhere else." The words hit like physical blows, striking at every insecurity Clara had ever harbored. But she didn't flinch. "You're right," she said calmly. "I didn't have anywhere else to go. I was unwanted in a lot of places. Too opinionated, too difficult, too much." She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "But you know what I learned? Being unwanted by people who need me to be small doesn't mean I'm not worthy. It means they are." Eleanor's eyes blazed. "You self-righteous—" "I'm not righteous," Clara cut her off. "I'm just done apologizing for existing. Done letting people like you tell me where I do and don't belong." She gestured to the house behind her, to the children watching from the windows. These children lost their mother, their father lost his wife. And yes, they were broken. Yes, they were suffering. But you know what? They're healing now. They're laughing again, eating again, living again. And if my presence here is the reason for that, if I'm the catalyst for their recovery, then I don't care what you think about my motives. You've bewitched them. I've fed them." Clara's voice rose for the first time, sharp with passion. "I've cleaned their house and washed their clothes and sat with them when they cried and celebrated with them when they smiled. I've done the work that needed doing, without glory, without recognition, without anything except the satisfaction of knowing I made a difference." She moved closer still, until they were nearly nose to nose. "And you can't stand it. You can't stand that I succeeded where you failed. That Silas Mercer would rather hire a cook with no references than accept your help, your attention, your calculated attempts to control his life." Eleanor's hand flew up. Whether to strike or simply to silence, Clara never knew, because Silas caught her wrist mid-air. "Enough," he said, his voice like iron. "Get off my property." Eleanor jerked her hand free, breathing hard. "You're making a mistake, Silas. This woman, This woman is the best thing that's happened to this house in 2 years, Silas said flatly. She's brought my children back to life. She's made this place feel like a home again. And if you can't see that, if all you can see is a threat to your plans, then you're even more lost than I thought. For the first time, Eleanor looked genuinely shaken. I only wanted to help you. After Sarah died, I thought, you thought you could swoop in and claim what you wanted, Silas interrupted. My land, my name, my children's future. You thought grief had made me weak enough to accept your terms. His jaw tightened. But I'm not weak, I'm just done. Done with your interference, your manipulation, your attempts to control what happens in my house. He pointed to the road. Leave. Now. And don't come back unless you're invited. Eleanor stood frozen, her carefully constructed mask of superiority crumbling. Clara could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing options, considering strategies, trying to find a way to salvage something from this disaster. But there was nothing left to salvage. This isn't over, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction now. It was the threat of someone who'd already lost and knew it. Yes, Clara said quietly. It is. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her wagon. The townspeople who'd come with her, witnesses to her humiliation, followed in uncomfortable silence. The wagons pulled away, leaving nothing but dust and the fading sound of wheels on gravel. Clara stood on the porch, watching them disappear, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd faced Eleanor Graves, the woman who terrified an entire town, and won. Not through manipulation or wealth or influence, but through simple, stubborn truth. You were incredible, Beth said from the doorway, her voice awed. Clara turned to find all the children there, crowded in the entrance, their faces bright with admiration and relief. I was angry, Clara said honestly, but sometimes anger is appropriate. You stood up to her, Marcus said, clutching his journal. Nobody does that. Nobody. Someone needed to. Clara smoothed her dress, suddenly aware of how much she was shaking. And I was tired of being afraid. Jace stepped forward. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then slowly, deliberately, he held out his hand. Clara took it. Thank you, he said simply. For staying, for fighting, for... He struggled for the words. For caring enough to be brave. Clara's throat tightened. You're welcome. They stood there, all of them, in the aftermath of the confrontation. The danger had passed. Eleanor Graves had been defeated, publicly and definitively. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming, something worse than legal threats or social manipulation. Eleanor Graves was a proud woman who'd just been humiliated in front of the whole town, and proud people, when cornered, became dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the law. That night, Clara lay awake long after the children had gone to bed, listening to the house settle around her. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of wind sounded like voices plotting in the darkness. She told herself she was being paranoid, that Eleanor had been defeated and would retreat, lick her wounds, find some other target for her ambitions. But deep down, in the place where instinct lived, Clara knew better. This wasn't over, not even close. The real attack was still coming, she just didn't know when. 3 days later, she found out. The smell of smoke woke her. Clara sat up in bed, her heart already racing, some primal part of her brain screaming danger before she was fully conscious. She sniffed the air, and there it was, unmistakable, terrifying. Fire! She threw off her blankets and ran to the window. Orange light flickered in the barn, flames already licking up the walls, spreading fast in the dry wood. Fire! Clara screamed, running from the room. Everyone up! The barn's on fire! The house erupted into chaos. Doors slammed open. Children cried out. Silas appeared from his room, already pulling on his boots, and raced for the stairs. Get water! He shouted. Jace, Beth, buckets now! Marcus, take the young ones outside, away from the house. Clara grabbed Samuel from his bed, thrust him at Marcus. Get them out. All of them. Don't come back inside for anything. Marcus nodded, white-faced, and started herding his siblings toward the door. Clara ran to the kitchen, filling every bucket she could find. Beth appeared beside her, moving with desperate efficiency. They carried water outside, where Silas and Jace had already formed a chain, passing buckets toward the burning barn. But it was too late. The fire had spread too fast, consumed too much. The barn was already engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. "The animals!" Beth cried. "The cow, the chickens!" "Already got them," Jace gasped, his face black with smoke. "Turned them loose. They ran." They fought the fire for what felt like hours but was probably less than one, throwing water on flames that seemed to mock their efforts. The barn was lost. They all knew it. But they fought anyway, desperately trying to keep the fire from spreading to the house, to the other outbuildings. Neighbors appeared, summoned by the glow visible for miles, and joined the effort. James Morrison and his sons, Mabel Hutchins, despite her age, even some townspeople who'd witnessed the confrontation with Eleanor Graves. Together they beat the fire back, contained it, finally extinguished it as dawn broke over the devastated ranch. The barn was gone. Nothing left but smoking ruins and the acrid smell of destruction. Silas stood staring at the wreckage, his face hollow with exhaustion and something darker, the recognition of deliberate malice. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. James Morrison nodded, pointing to the barn's remains. "See how it started? Multiple points of origin. Someone set this fire. Deliberately." Clara felt cold settle into her bones despite the heat still radiating from the ruins. "Eleanor." "You don't know that," Jay said, but his voice was uncertain. "Who else?" Clara looked at the destruction, at the calculated cruelty of it. "She couldn't force me out legally, couldn't intimidate me into leaving, so she took something precious, something that would hurt." "We can't prove it," Silas said, his voice rough with smoke and rage. "No," Clara agreed. "We can't, and she knows it." They stood in silence, watching smoke rise from the ruins of the barn, and Clara felt something harden in her chest. This was beyond intimidation now, beyond legal maneuvering or social pressure. This was war. And Eleanor Graves had just proved she was willing to destroy everything Silas Mercer had built, willing to put children at risk, willing to commit actual crimes to get what she wanted. "What do we do?" Beth asked quietly. She was filthy with soot, her dress ruined, her hands blistered from carrying water. But her eyes were fierce. "How do we fight someone who'll do this?" Clara looked at the children, all of them exhausted, frightened, but standing together. At Silas, his face set in hard lines. At the neighbors who'd come to help, who'd witnessed Eleanor's malice even if they couldn't prove it. "We rebuild," she said firmly. "We rebuild the barn. We recover the animals. We keep going. Because if we give up now, if we let this destroy us, then she wins." "The cost," Silas began. "We'll manage," Clara interrupted. "We've managed everything else. We'll manage this too." James Morrison stepped forward. "You'll have help. My boys and I can spare time. We'll help rebuild." "And I can provide lumber," another neighbor offered. "At cost, no profit." More offers came, spoken quietly but firmly. The community that had stood up for Clara at the town council meeting was standing up again, refusing to let Eleanor Graves's cruelty go unchallenged. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time for emotion later. Right now, they had work to do. "Thank you," Silas said, his voice thick. "All of you. We won't forget this." The neighbors dispersed slowly, promising to return with supplies and labor. Soon, only the Mercer family and Claire remained, standing in the ruins of what had been. "I'm sorry," Claire said quietly. "If I hadn't stayed, if I hadn't fought her—" "Don't!" Silas's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare apologize for being the target of someone else's cruelty." He looked at the burned barn, his jaw tight. "This is on Eleanor, not you. She made this choice. She committed this crime." "But we can't prove it," Jace said bitterly. "She'll get away with it." "Maybe," Clara said, "but she didn't break us. And that's what she wanted, to break us, to make us give up." She looked at each of them. "We're still standing, still together. That's what matters." They went inside as the sun rose fully, bringing light to the destruction. Clara made breakfast with hands that shook but didn't stop moving. The children ate in silence, too exhausted and shocked for conversation. Only when they were finished, when the worst of the immediate crisis was past, did Samuel speak. "She's bad," he said, his small voice cutting through the quiet. Mrs. Graves is bad. Yes, Clara said, not bothering to soften it. She is. Will she hurt us again? The question hung in the air. Clara wanted to lie, to promise that the danger had passed, but she'd built trust with these children by telling the truth, even when it was hard. I don't know, she said honestly, but I promise you this. We won't face it alone, and we won't give up. No matter what she does, we stay together. Samuel nodded slowly, processing this. Then he climbed down from his chair and walked to Clara, wrapping his small arms around her waist. Don't leave, he whispered. Clara held him tight. I'm not going anywhere. She meant it. Eleanor Graves could burn down every building on this ranch, could destroy every material thing they owned, but she couldn't burn away the bonds that had formed between them, couldn't destroy the family they were becoming. And that, Clara realized, was what Eleanor truly couldn't stand. Not that Clara had refused to leave, but that she'd succeeded in creating something Eleanor's money and influence could never buy. Genuine love, freely given. The fire had been an attempt to destroy that, to prove that Clara's presence brought only suffering. It had failed. They were hurt, yes. Angry, yes. But not broken. And as long as they remained unbroken, Eleanor Graves had lost. The real question now was, what would she try next? But that afternoon brought an answer Clara never expected. A rider came from town, a young man Clara didn't recognize. He dismounted quickly, his face urgent. Is Mrs. Whitlock here? He asked. Clara stepped forward. I am. The young man handed her a sealed envelope. From Judge Harrison. He asked me to deliver it directly to you. Clara's hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. She read it once, then again, unable to believe what she was seeing. What is it? Silas asked. Clara looked up, her face pale. Eleanor Graves has filed a complaint with the territorial court. She's claiming that my presence here is detrimental to the children's welfare. She's demanding a formal hearing to determine my fitness as a caregiver. But the sheriff already investigated, Beth protested. He found nothing wrong. That was a local inspection, the young man explained. This is different. This is a formal court proceeding. If the judge rules against you, Mrs. Whitlock, you'll be legally barred from working here, from even being on the property. Clara felt the world tilt. This was Eleanor's real attack. Not fire, not intimidation, law. Binding, enforceable, inescapable. When? Silas demanded. 1 week, the young man said. The hearing is in 1 week. He left, and they stood in stunned silence. Eleanor Graves had played her final card, and this time there might be no way to win. The week that followed felt like living inside a ticking clock, each day bringing them closer to a moment that could tear everything apart. Clara threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on fury. She cooked, cleaned, organized the rebuilding efforts for the barn, and maintained the household routines with rigid precision. If she stopped moving, she'd have to think. And thinking led to fear. The children sensed it. They moved around her carefully, as if she were made of glass that might shatter at any moment. It was Marcus who finally confronted her on the third day. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor, already clean, but she needed something to do with her hands. When he appeared in the doorway. You're going to wear through the wood, he observed. Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. It needed cleaning. It was clean yesterday. Marcus came closer, his journal tucked under his arm as always. You're scared. I'm preparing. You're terrified. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. And you're working yourself to exhaustion so you don't have to feel it. Clara opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. What was the point of lying to a boy who saw everything? Yes, she admitted. I'm terrified. Marcus sat down on the floor beside her, heedless of the damp wood. What happens if you lose? At the hearing, I mean. I have to leave, immediately. I won't be allowed to come back. Clara's voice cracked. I won't be allowed to see any of you again. That's not fair. No, it's not. Clara picked up the scrub brush, then set it down again. But Eleanor Graves has the law on her side now. She has money for lawyers, influence with the judge. And I have, she gestured helplessly. Nothing, just the truth. And sometimes the truth isn't enough. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his young face serious. Can I show you something? He opened his journal and flipped through pages filled with his neat handwriting. He stopped on an entry dated 2 weeks earlier and handed the journal to Clara. She read, Day 24. The new cook, Clara, did something strange today. Samuel was crying because he had a nightmare. Most people would have told him to be quiet, to be brave, to stop making noise. Clara didn't. She picked him up, sat in the rocking chair, and just held him. For an hour. She didn't tell him to stop crying, she just let him cry until he was done. And when he finally fell asleep, she kept holding him. Like he mattered. Like his fear mattered. I don't think anyone's done that since Ma died. I think that's what makes her different. She doesn't try to fix us. She just lets us be broken. And somehow that makes us feel less broken. Clara's vision blurred. Marcus, keep reading, he said quietly. She turned the page. There were more entries, dozens of them. Small observations about how Clara had taught Caroline to braid her own hair, how she'd sat with Thomas while he told her the story of every single rock in his collection, how she'd asked Beth about her dreams, her hopes, what she wanted to be when she grew up, questions no one had asked Beth in years, how she'd made Jace laugh, actually laugh, for the first time since his mother's death, how Lily had started speaking again, haltingly at first, then more confidently, how even Silas had started joining them for dinner, started asking questions about their days, started being a father again instead of a ghost haunting his own house. You changed everything, Marcus said when Clara looked up, tears streaming down her face. And it wasn't because you tried to be perfect or because you had fancy credentials. It was because you saw us, really saw us, and you stayed anyway. I'm going to lose you, Clara whispered. All of you. Not if we fight. Marcus took back his journal. At the hearing, I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell the judge everything I've written, everything you've done. And I'm not the only one. Marcus, no, you're children. You shouldn't have to. We're not asking permission. He stood, his jaw set with determination that reminded Clara heartbreakingly of Jace. You fought for us. Now we fight for you. Before Clara could respond, he was gone. That evening, she discovered what he meant. The children called a meeting, their term, delivered by Beth with unexpected formality. They gathered in the front room after dinner, all 7 of them plus Silas, and faced Clara with expressions that ranged from determined to terrified. We've been talking, Jace said. He stood at the front, clearly elected as spokesperson. About the hearing. About what we're going to do. Jace, you don't have to. Yes, we do. He held up a hand, stopping her protest. We're going to testify. All of us who are old enough. We're going to tell the judge exactly what you've meant to this family. The judge won't listen to children, Clara said gently. Eleanor Graves will make it seem like you've been coached, manipulated. Then let her try. Beth stepped forward. I'm 14, old enough to know my own mind, and I know that before you came, this house was a tomb. We were just existing, waiting for enough time to pass that we could leave and never come back. Her voice shook but didn't break. You made it a home again. You made us want to stay. I can tell the judge about my rock collection, Thomas offered. His voice was small but earnest. About how you listened to all my stories even though they probably didn't make sense. About how nobody else ever listened before. And I have my drawings, Caroline added. She held up a folder Clara hadn't known existed. I drew pictures, before you came and after you came. The judge can see the difference. Clara looked at the before pictures, dark, violent scribbles of storms and faceless figures. Then at the after pictures, still rough, still childlike, but filled with light and color and recognizable people. A family around a table, a woman cooking, children playing, hope rendered in crayon. This won't be enough, Clara said, her voice breaking. Eleanor Graves has power, money, influence, and we have the truth, Jace interrupted. You taught us that truth matters, that standing up to bullies matters. Were you lying? No, but then we fight. He crossed his arms. Together, the way you taught us. Clara looked at their faces, at the determination and fear and fierce love shining in their eyes. These children who'd lost so much were willing to risk being hurt again, willing to stand in front of a judge and expose their hearts, all to keep her from being taken away. She couldn't speak, could only nod. Silas, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. They're right. We all testify. We tell the truth. And we hope it's enough. And if it's not? Clara managed to ask. Then we'll face that together too, Silas said. But we don't surrender before the fight even begins. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jace and Beth practiced their testimonies, learning to speak clearly and confidently. Marcus organized his journal entries into a coherent timeline. Caroline selected her best drawings. Thomas rehearsed his stories about the rocks, about how Clara had made him feel heard. Even Lily, who still spoke rarely, wanted to help. I can tell him, she whispered to Clara one evening. Tell the judge that you made me brave enough to talk again. Clara held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feeling of this small child trusting her. You were always brave, sweetheart. You just needed time. No, Lily insisted. I needed you. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. Clara dressed in her best dress, the blue one Beth had pressed so carefully. She braided her hair with shaking hands, pinned it up, and stared at her reflection in the small mirror. This was it. Everything came down to this. Downstairs, the children were waiting, dressed in their Sunday best. Silas stood by the door in a suit Clara had never seen him wear, his face grave but resolved. Ready? He asked. Clara took a deep breath. No, but let's go anyway. They took 2 wagons into town, the journey passing in tense silence. When they arrived at the courthouse, a crowd had already gathered. Clara recognized many faces from the town council meeting, Mabel Hutchins, James Morrison, Anna Brennan. But there were others too, people she didn't know, drawn by curiosity or loyalty to Eleanor Graves or simple desire to witness drama. Eleanor herself waited on the courthouse steps, dressed in black silk, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, her lawyers, clearly. She looked at Clara with cold satisfaction. Mrs. Whitlock, she said pleasantly, so glad you could make it. Though I suppose you had no choice. Clara didn't respond. Didn't give her the satisfaction. They filed into the courtroom, a simple room with wooden benches and a raised platform where Judge Harrison sat, looking deeply uncomfortable with the entire proceedings. He was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, with the face of someone who'd seen enough of human nature to be perpetually disappointed. This is highly irregular, he said as people settled into seats. Mrs. Graves, I'm still not clear on why you've brought this matter to territorial court rather than handling it through local channels. Because local channels failed, Your Honor. Eleanor's voice was smooth, practiced. The sheriff's inspection was cursory at best. This matter requires proper judicial oversight. Judge Harrison sighed. Very well, let's proceed. Mrs. Graves, you're claiming that Mrs. Clara Whitlock is unfit to serve as a caregiver in the Mercer household. Present your evidence. What followed was a systematic assassination of Clara's character. Eleanor's lawyers painted her as a vagrant, a woman with no references, no verifiable employment history, who'd appeared from nowhere and insinuated herself into a grieving family. They questioned her motives, suggested financial exploitation, implied moral corruption. They called witnesses, townspeople who'd never met Clara but were happy to speculate about her character. A merchant who claimed she'd been rude when asking for credit. A woman who'd heard rumors about Clara's past marriages, her difficulties keeping positions. It was all innuendo and hearsay, but it was effective. Clara watched the judge's face grow more concerned with each testimony. Then it was the defense's turn. Silas had hired a lawyer, not expensive but competent, a young man named Robert Chen who'd recently opened a practice in town. Your Honor, Robert began, the prosecution has given us speculation and gossip. We'd like to present facts. First, I call Jace Mercer to the stand. Jace stood, his face pale but determined. He walked to the witness box and sat down, his hands gripping the chair arms. Jace, Robert said gently, tell the court what life was like before Mrs. Whitlock arrived. Jace swallowed hard. It was empty. After Ma died, Pa stopped talking, stopped caring about anything. And we were just, his voice cracked. We were just trying to survive. The house was falling apart. The younger kids were scared all the time. I was trying to hold everything together, but I was 16 and I didn't know how. And after Mrs. Whitlock arrived, everything changed. Jace looked directly at the judge. Not immediately. We didn't trust her at first. We thought she'd leave like all the others. But she didn't. She stayed. She cooked real meals, not just whatever we could throw together. She listened to us. She made the house feel like a place where people lived instead of just existed. Did she ever mistreat you or your siblings? Never. Jace's voice was firm. Never once. She's been kind and patient, and she actually cares about us. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. Eleanor's lawyer stood. Mr. Mercer, isn't it true that Mrs. Whitlock arrived with no references? That you know nothing about her past? I know everything I need to know, Jace shot back. I know she saved my family. Beth testified next, her voice soft but steady. She described how Clara had taught her to have preferences again, to believe her opinions mattered, how Clara had made her feel like more than just a caretaker for her younger siblings. Marcus brought his journal and read selected entries, his clinical documentation of Clara's impact somehow more powerful than any emotional plea could have been. Caroline showed her drawings, the stark contrast between before and after. Thomas told his rambling stories about rocks and how Clara never once told him to be quiet or stop wasting her time. And then Lily took the stand. The courtroom went completely silent as the tiny 5-year-old climbed into the witness box. She had to stand to see over the edge. Lily, Robert said gently, can you tell the judge about Mrs. Whitlock? Lily looked at Clara, her dark eyes enormous. She made me brave. How did she do that? She stayed. Lily's voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent courtroom everyone heard. Everyone else left. But she stayed, even when people were mean, even when things were scary. She just stayed. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Eleanor's lawyer stood. Miss Mercer, do you understand that Mrs. Whitlock is just an employee, that she's paid to be there? Lily frowned, considering this. People get paid for lots of things. But she loves us. You can't pay someone to love you. They just do or they don't. She looked at the lawyer with a child's devastating honesty. She does. There was nothing he could say to that. The testimonies concluded. Judge Harrison called a recess to consider the evidence. The courtroom emptied, people spilling into the hallway, the day outside. Clara stood in a corner, surrounded by the children, feeling wrung out and exhausted. You did so well, she told them. All of you. I'm so proud. Will it be enough? Beth asked quietly. I don't know, Clara admitted. But you were brave and you told the truth. That's all we could do. 30 minutes later, they were called back inside. Judge Harrison looked grave as he took his seat. Clara felt her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This has been one of the most unusual cases I've presided over, the judge began. Mrs. Graves, your concerns are not without merit. Mrs. Whitlock did arrive with minimal documentation, and that would normally be cause for concern. He paused. However, the evidence presented by the Mercer children is compelling. They are clearly healthy, well cared for, and emotionally attached to Mrs. Whitlock in a way that suggests genuine affection rather than manipulation. Clara held her breath. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm troubled by the timing of this complaint. It appears to have been filed immediately after Mrs. Whitlock refused to comply with your wishes, Mrs. Graves. That suggests this is not about child welfare, but personal grievance. Eleanor's face went white. Therefore, Judge Harrison said, I'm ruling in favor of the defense. Mrs. Whitlock is permitted to continue her employment with the Mercer family. This case is dismissed. The courtroom erupted. The children cheered. Silas closed his eyes in relief. Clara felt her knees give way, and Beth caught her, both of them laughing and crying at once. But Clara saw Eleanor's face, saw the rage, the humiliation, the cold calculation already beginning behind her eyes. This wasn't over. The legal battle was won, but Eleanor Graves had other weapons, and Clara had just humiliated her in front of the entire town. They left the courthouse in triumph, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. That night, after the celebration dinner, after the children had finally gone to bed exhausted and happy, Clara stood in the kitchen alone, staring out at the darkness. You're worried, Silas appeared in the doorway. "She won't let this go," Clara said quietly. "Eleanor Graves. She's been beaten twice now, at the council meeting and in court. She's not the kind of woman who accepts defeat." "What can she do? The judge ruled in your favor." Clara turned to face him. "I don't know, but something. And whatever it is, it will be worse than anything she's tried before." Silas moved to stand beside her, looking out into the night. "Then we'll face it, together." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, when Sarah died, I thought my life was over. Thought the best I could do was survive until the children were grown, then—" He didn't finish. "But you came here, and you reminded me that life is something you have to fight for, something worth protecting." "Silas, I'm not good with words," he interrupted. "Never have been. But I need you to know, you're not just the cook, not just someone we hired. You're—" He struggled, then gave up trying to find perfect words. "You're family, and we protect family." Before Clara could respond, before she could tell him what that meant to her, a scream shattered the night. They ran. Up the stairs toward the sound, Clara's heart in her throat. It was Lily's room. Beth was already there, standing in the doorway, her face white with terror. "She won't wake up," Beth gasped. "Lily won't wake up." Clara pushed past her. Lily lay in her bed, her small face flushed with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. Clara touched her forehead and jerked back. The child was burning up. "How long has she been sick?" Clara demanded. "I don't know," Beth said, tears streaming down her face. "She seemed fine at dinner. She went to bed normal. I just checked on her and she was like this." Clara's mind raced. Fever that high, that fast. It could be anything. Influenza, pneumonia, scarlet fever. Without a doctor, without medicine, in this isolated place. "Get cold water," she ordered. "Cloths, every blanket we have. Silas, ride to town, get the doctor. Now." Silas was already moving. "It's a 2-hour ride there and back." "Then go fast." Clara picked up Lily, feeling the heat radiating from her small body. "I'll keep her alive until you get back. Go." He went. The next hours were a nightmare. Clara stripped Lily down to her underclothes, sponged her with cool water, tried to get her to drink. The fever climbed. Lily thrashed, delirious, crying out for her mother, for Clara, for things that made no sense. The other children gathered in the doorway, watching with terrified eyes. "Go to bed," Clara said, not taking her eyes off Lily. "There's nothing you can do here." "We're not leaving," Jace said firmly. "She's our sister." Clara didn't have the energy to argue. "Fine, but stay back. Give me room to work." She worked, applying cool cloths, changing them when they grew warm, monitoring Lily's breathing, her pulse. The fever peaked, held, peaked higher. Lily's lips turned blue. Her breathing became labored, rattling in her chest. "Come on, sweetheart," Clara whispered, cradling the small child. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Hours passed. Midnight came and went. 1 in the morning, 2. The fever broke suddenly, violently. Lily convulsed, her small body rigid, and Clara had to hold her down to keep her from hurting herself. Then finally, the rigidity passed. Lily went limp, her breathing evening out, her fever dropping. Clara felt for a pulse. Found it. Weak but steady. She looked up to find all 6 children staring at her with hope and terror warring on their faces. "She's alive," Clara said hoarsely. "The fever broke. She's alive." Beth collapsed, sobbing. Marcus put his arm around her. The others just stood there, too exhausted and frightened to react. Clara kept vigil through the night, watching Lily sleep, monitoring every breath. The child was out of immediate danger, but she was weak, so weak. And without the doctor, without knowing what had caused the fever, Clara couldn't be sure it wouldn't come back. Dawn came. Lily's eyes fluttered open. "Clara?" she whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart." Clara smoothed the damp hair back from her forehead. "I'm right here." "I dreamed you left." "Never," Clara said fiercely. "I'm never leaving you." Lily smiled weakly and drifted back to sleep. Real sleep this time, not the fevered delirium of before. Silas arrived an hour later with the doctor, a harried-looking man who examined Lily thoroughly and pronounced her out of danger. It was scarlet fever, he said, packing his bag. Mild case, fortunately. Someone nursed her through the worst of it very competently. He looked at Clara with professional respect. You saved her life. A few more hours of that fever, and he didn't finish. Didn't need to. After he left, Clara sat in the chair beside Lily's bed, unable to move, unable to think. She'd fought death and won, but the cost had been everything she had. Silas found her there an hour later, slumped in the chair, finally allowing herself to feel the terror of what had almost happened. You should rest, he said gently. I can't. Clara's voice was raw. What if the fever comes back? What if Beth can watch her, the other children? We'll take shifts. He crouched beside the chair. Clara, you fought all night. You saved her, but you can't keep fighting if you don't rest. I promised her I wouldn't leave, and you haven't. You won't. He touched her hand. But you need sleep. Just a few hours, please. Clara looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully now, the flush fading from her cheeks. Then at Silas, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something warmer, deeper. A few hours, she agreed. But wake me if anything changes. I will. She stumbled to her room, collapsed on the bed, and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. When she woke, it was late afternoon. Panic seized her. Lily, what had happened to Lily? And she raced back to the sick room. Lily was awake, propped up on pillows, eating broth that Beth was spooning to her. She looked fragile, pale, but alive. So wonderfully alive. You're awake, Lily said, her voice weak but glad. So are you. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, touching Lily's forehead. Cool. The fever was truly gone. How do you feel? Tired, but better. Lily looked at her seriously. Beth said you stayed with me all night, that you wouldn't let me die. You weren't going to die, Clara said firmly, though her voice shook. I wouldn't allow it. Lily smiled. I knew you wouldn't leave me. Clara pulled the child into a gentle hug, being careful of her weakened state. Never. I'll never leave you. Over Lily's head, she met Beth's eyes and saw her own relief reflected there. They'd come so close to losing her, so terribly close. That night, the family gathered in Lily's room, against the doctor's advice about rest, but nobody could bear to be separated. They sat on the floor, on chairs pulled from other rooms, just being together. I've been thinking, Marcus said quietly, about what happened. The fire, then the hearing, now this illness. He looked at Clara. Mrs. Graves lost at the courthouse. This is what comes next. Lily getting sick isn't Eleanor's fault, Silas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not directly, Jace said slowly, but everything else, the fire, the legal attack, it's all been about breaking us, about proving that Clara being here brings chaos and danger. His jaw tightened. And now Lily gets deathly ill right after the hearing. It's convenient timing. You think Eleanor Graves somehow made Lily sick? Clara asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I think Eleanor Graves is capable of anything, Jace said, and I think we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Clara wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, wanted to believe that even Eleanor wouldn't stoop to harming a child, but she'd seen the woman's face in the courthouse, had seen the cold calculation, the absolute refusal to accept defeat, and she knew, with sickening certainty, that Jace was right. This was war. And Eleanor Graves had just proved she would stop at nothing, not fire, not law, not even the safety of an innocent child, to win it. The question now was, what would she try next? And could they survive it? The answer came 3 days later, not from Eleanor Graves herself, but from an unexpected visitor. Clara was in the kitchen kneading bread while Lily dozed in a chair nearby. The child was recovering but still weak, and Clara refused to let her out of sight. The other children were scattered throughout the house, the boys helping Silas with morning chores, the girls doing laundry. A knock at the door made Clara tense. Every unexpected sound still sent her pulse racing, waiting for the next attack. But when she opened the door, she found Peter Morrison standing there again, the boy who'd brought the first warning. This time his mother stood beside him, a thin woman with work-worn hands and eyes that had seen too much. Mrs. Whitlock, the woman said quietly. I'm Sarah Morrison. May I come in? Clara stepped aside, ushering them into the kitchen. She poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly, waiting. Sarah Morrison took a breath, then spoke quickly, as if the words needed to escape before her courage failed. I've worked for Eleanor Graves for 5 years, cleaning her house, managing her household. I've kept quiet about things I've seen, things I've heard, because I need the work and she pays well. She met Clara's eyes. But what she's planning now, I can't be silent anymore. Clara's stomach dropped. What is she planning? She's leaving. Sarah's words fell like stones into still water. She's selling most of her properties here and moving to San Francisco. She told her lawyer yesterday. She's done with this town, done with trying to control people who won't be controlled. Clara stared at her, unable to process this. Eleanor Graves is leaving? Yes, but before she goes, Sarah's face twisted with disgust. She wants revenge. One final blow. She's been asking questions about you, Mrs. Whitlock, about your past, your previous positions. She's hired investigators, spent a fortune trying to find something she can use to destroy your reputation permanently. Did she find anything? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. No, Sarah smiled grimly, because there's nothing to find. You're exactly what you appear to be, a woman who's had a hard life and some difficult positions, but who's always done right by the people she served. She leaned forward. But Eleanor doesn't need truth. She's planning to fabricate evidence. Letters from supposed former employers detailing misconduct. Testimony from people she's paid to lie. She's going to create a scandal so large that even after the lies are disproved, the damage will be permanent. Clara felt cold seep through her bones. When? This weekend. She's hosting a social gathering, her farewell party, and she plans to make the accusations there in front of everyone who matters in this town. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She'll make you sound like a criminal, a threat to children, a woman of such low character that no decent person would employ you. And even when the truth comes out, people will always wonder, always whisper. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. You could lose your position. I already have. Sarah's smile was bitter. I gave notice this morning, told Mrs. Graves I was done working for her. She knows I'm here now, knows I'm warning you, but I don't care. She looked at her son, then back at Clara. Peter told me what you did, how you stood up to her, how you fought for those children. Someone needed to stand with you. Someone needed to tell you what was coming. Clara sat down heavily, her mind racing. A public accusation, carefully orchestrated, impossible to defend against in the moment. Even if she could eventually prove the accusations false, the damage would be done. No one would hire her. The Mercer children would suffer by association. Everything she'd built here would crumble. There has to be a way to stop her, Clara said. There is. The voice came from the doorway. They all turned. Mabel Hutchins stood there, leaning on her cane with Anna Brennan beside her. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered. James Morrison, Robert Chen, the lawyer, the neighbors who'd helped rebuild the barn, even some townspeople Clara barely knew. We've been talking, Mabel said, moving into the kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd never asked permission for anything. About Eleanor Graves and her poison, about how she's controlled this town for too long, hurt too many people. She planted her cane firmly, and we've decided it ends now. How? Clara asked, hope flickering despite her fear. Anna Brennan stepped forward. Eleanor's power comes from 2 sources, money and fear. We can't match her money, but we can eliminate the fear. If enough of us stand together, if enough of us publicly support you and call out her lies, she can't destroy you. She'll attack all of you, Clara protested. Use her influence to hurt your businesses, your families. Let her try. James Morrison's voice was hard. She's leaving anyway. Her power here is already dying, and the rest of us, we're tired of cowering. Robert Chen pulled out papers from his satchel. I've been doing research. Eleanor Graves's business practices aren't as clean as she pretends. She's used coercion, intimidation, possibly fraud to build her holdings. If we can document it, if we can bring it to light before she leaves, he met Clara's eyes. We can destroy her reputation the way she's tried to destroy yours. That's dangerous, Clara said. She's already proven she'll commit arson, possibly worse, which is why we're doing this together. Mabel thumped her cane. Strength in numbers. She can hurt one person, maybe two, but not 20, not 50. Not a whole town deciding they've had enough. Clara looked at their faces, some frightened, some determined, all resolved. These people were willing to risk Eleanor's wrath to protect her, to protect the truth. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Anna smiled. "Attend the party, face her accusations, and when she makes them, don't fight alone. We'll be there. All of us." The plan formed over the next 2 days. Robert Chen gathered evidence of Eleanor's questionable business dealings. Contracts signed under duress, properties acquired through intimidation, merchants forced out of business by her machinations. Mabel organized the townspeople, creating a network of support that spread faster than wildfire. Anna Brennan reached out to her contacts in the territorial government, laying groundwork for a formal investigation into Eleanor's practices. And Clara prepared herself for what was coming. Silas was adamant that she didn't have to go. "Stay here," he urged the night before the party. "Let the others handle it. You don't need to face her." "Yes, I do." Clara was mending one of Samuel's shirts, her hand steady despite her churning stomach. "If I hide, if I let others fight my battles, then Eleanor wins. She proves I'm weak, that her accusations have merit." She set down the mending. "I need to face her. Need to show those children that when someone attacks you with lies, you meet them with truth." "You're braver than I am," Silas said quietly. Clara laughed, sharp and humorless. "I'm terrified, but I've learned that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs doing despite it." She looked at him then, really looked. The man who'd been a ghost when she arrived was fully present now, grief still there, always there, but no longer consuming him. He was a father again, a rancher, a man who'd remembered how to live. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For letting me stay. For fighting with me. For—" She struggled for words. "For seeing me." Silas moved closer. "Clara, I need to tell you something. Before tomorrow, before whatever happens at that party." He took a breath. "When you first came here, you were just the cook. Someone to manage the household, nothing more. But you became—" He stopped, started again. "You became essential. Not just to the children, but to me. You reminded me that life is more than grief, that there's still joy to be found, still purpose." Clara's heart hammered. "Silas, let me finish." His voice was rough. "I'm not good at this. At feelings, at words. But I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whether we win or lose, you've changed everything. You've given us back our family, and I—" He met her eyes. "I don't want to lose you. Not to Eleanor Graves, not to fear, not to anything." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Clara didn't dare examine too closely. "You won't lose me," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." "But promise." "Promise." The party was held at Eleanor's grand house on Saturday evening. Clara arrived with Silas, both dressed in their best, walking into what felt like a lion's den. The house was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, expensive art on every wall. Eleanor had spared no expense for her farewell, wanting to remind everyone of her wealth and power one final time. She greeted them at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Whitlock, Mr. Mercer, how unexpected." "We received an invitation," Silas said evenly. "We decided to accept." Eleanor's smile tightened. "Of course. Do come in." The room was full of town notables, merchants, ranchers, the council members, even Judge Harrison. Clara felt their eyes on her, some curious, some sympathetic, some already judging. She held her head high and walked through the crowd with Silas at her side. The evening proceeded with excruciating slowness. Dinner was served, elaborate courses Clara barely tasted. Speeches were given, Eleanor accepting compliments and well wishes with gracious smiles. Throughout it all, Clara waited, tension coiling tighter with each passing moment. Finally, after dessert had been cleared and people were beginning to relax, Eleanor stood. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice carrying beautifully through the room. "As you know, I'll be leaving soon for San Francisco, but before I go, there's a matter of conscience I must address." Here it comes, Clara thought, bracing herself. It concerns the welfare of the Mercer children, Eleanor continued. I know we've discussed this before, but new information has come to light. Information about Mrs. Clara Whitlock that deeply troubles me. She pulled out papers from a folder on the table. I've received letters from her previous employers, letters detailing disturbing behavior, theft, dishonesty, inappropriate conduct with children. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara felt the room's attention swing toward her like a weapon. These are serious accusations, Eleanor said, her voice dripping false concern. And while I take no pleasure in exposing them, I cannot in good conscience leave this town knowing children are in danger. She began reading from the letters, elaborate fabrications detailing crimes Clara had never committed, behaviors she'd never exhibited. The lies were specific, detailed, damning. Clara stood frozen, watching her reputation being systematically destroyed. Then Anna Brennan stood up. Mrs. Graves, she said clearly, may I see those letters? Eleanor blinked, momentarily thrown. Of course, but now, please. Anna held out her hand. Eleanor handed over the letters with visible reluctance. Anna examined them, then looked up with an expression of contempt. These are forgeries, she announced. The letterhead is wrong. This supposed employer's business closed 5 years ago, before Mrs. Whitlock would have worked there. This signature doesn't match the handwriting, and this, she held up another letter. This letter claims misconduct in a town Mrs. Whitlock has never even visited. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Eleanor's face went white. You're mistaken, she said quickly. These letters were verified. By whom? Robert Chen stood now, pulling out his own papers. Because I've spent the last 3 days tracking down Mrs. Whitlock's actual employment history. Every family she's worked for. Would you like to hear what they really said about her? He began reading testimonials, real ones, obtained through painstaking investigation. Former employers praising Clara's competence, her kindness, her dedication. A few mentioned that she'd left due to philosophical differences, but none detailed misconduct or abuse. The truth, Robert said, looking directly at Eleanor, is that Mrs. Whitlock is exactly what she appears to be, a capable woman who's had disagreements with employers who wanted her to be silent and subservient. Her only crime is refusing to bow to authority she didn't respect. Mabel Hutchins stood next. And while we're discussing crimes, perhaps we should talk about the barn fire at the Mercer Ranch, the one that started from multiple points of origin, the one that happened right after Mrs. Whitlock humiliated you in court. Eleanor's composure was cracking. That fire was investigated. There was no evidence, because you're careful, James Morrison interrupted, standing, but not careful enough. My son saw one of your ranch hands near the Mercer property that night, saw him riding away fast right before the fire started. Coincidence, Eleanor said, but her voice shook. Is it also coincidence, Anna asked, that you've systematically driven away every woman who tried to work for the Mercers? That you've used your business interest to punish anyone who crossed you? That you've built your fortune through intimidation and coercion? More people stood. Merchants Eleanor had threatened, ranchers she'd pressured, a whole town's worth of resentment finally finding its voice. Eleanor looked around wildly, seeing the trap closing. You can't prove any of this. These are just accusations. Like yours were? Clara spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the chaos. She stood, walked to face Eleanor directly. You wanted to destroy me with lies, to make me so toxic that no one would ever hire me again, that I'd have to leave not just the Mercer Ranch, but the territory entirely. She moved closer. But here's what you didn't understand. I'm not alone anymore. I have people who know me, who trust me, who are willing to stand with me against your poison. Eleanor's face twisted with rage. You're nothing, a vagrant, a parasite. I'm a woman who knows her worth, Clara interrupted, who doesn't need your approval or anyone else's to know she matters, who's found a family not through blood or obligation, but through choice. She gestured to the crowd. And apparently, I'm not the only one tired of being afraid of you. For a long moment, Eleanor just stared at her. Then, incredibly, she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You think you've won, she said quietly. You think standing together makes you strong. But you're just postponing the inevitable. Sooner or later, they'll turn on you. They always do. Maybe, Clara agreed. But not today. And today is enough. Eleanor looked around the room one last time, seeing the condemnation in every face. Then, without another word, she turned and left her own party, climbing the stairs to the upper floors of her house. The room erupted into conversation. People surrounded Clara, offering support, apologies for not acting sooner, congratulations on her courage. Through it all, Clara felt a strange numbness. They'd won. Eleanor Graves was defeated, publicly shamed, her power broken. But the victory felt hollow, because underneath the rage and malice, Clara had seen something else in Eleanor's eyes. Loneliness. The desperate isolation of someone who'd pushed away every genuine connection in pursuit of control. "Don't pity her," Silas said quietly, reading her expression. "She made her choices." "I know," Clara said, "but it's still sad. All that wealth, all that power, and she's completely alone." "That's not going to be you," Silas said firmly, "because you chose differently. You chose connection over control." Clara looked around the room, at the townspeople who'd defended her, at Robert Chen organizing documentation of Eleanor's crimes, at Mabel and Anna already planning community changes to prevent future abuse of power. She'd come to this town a stranger with nothing but a trunk and a past. She'd faced rejection, intimidation, legal attacks, arson, and now character assassination. And she'd survived, not alone, but together with people who'd decided she was worth fighting for. The party disbanded soon after, people drifting away in small groups, still processing what had happened. Clara and Silas rode home in comfortable silence, the weight of tension finally lifting. The children were waiting on the porch despite the late hour, unable to sleep until they knew what had happened. "Well?" Jace demanded as soon as they arrived. "It's over," Clara said simply. "Eleanor's power is broken. The lies were exposed. We won." The children erupted in cheers. They swarmed Clara and Silas, asking questions all at once, laughing with relief and joy. Only Lily was quiet. She walked up to Clara and took her hand. "You're staying?" she asked, needing to hear it one more time. "I'm staying," Clara confirmed. "Forever, if you'll have me." Lily smiled and hugged her tight. That night, after the children finally went to bed, Clara sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. She heard footsteps and knew without looking that it was Silas. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I need to ask you something," he said after a long silence. "All right. When you first came here, you said you'd stay until you decided to leave, that it would be your choice." He turned to look at her. "Is that still true?" Clara's heart raced. "Yes." "Then I'm asking—" He took a breath. "I'm asking if you'd consider staying permanently. Not as the cook, as—" He struggled for words. "As family. As my wife. As mother to those children who already love you like you're theirs." Clara's breath caught. "Silas, I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other in some ways, but I also know that you've changed everything, that I can't imagine this house without you, that I don't want to." His voice was raw with honesty. "I'm not offering romance or grand passion. I'm offering partnership, respect, a home where you'll never have to apologize for who you are." "And love?" Clara asked quietly. "Is there love in this offer?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "I love Sarah. That doesn't go away. But yes, there's love here too. Different, maybe, built on friendship and respect and shared purpose, but real." He met her eyes. "I love who you are, who you've helped me become. And I think, with time, that love could grow into something neither of us expected." Clara thought about all the places she'd left, all the times she'd been told she was too much or not enough. Thought about arriving at this broken ranch with nothing but determination and stubbornness. Thought about 7 children who'd chosen to fight for her. A man who'd learned to live again because she'd refused to let him fade. A community that had stood with her against power and money. Thought about finding, in the last place she expected, a home. "Yes," she said simply. Silas's face transformed. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it." Clara smiled through tears. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go, but I'm staying because this is where I belong." He pulled her close, and they sat there together, two people who'd been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. The wedding was simple, held 3 weeks later under open sky with the whole community in attendance. Clara wore a dress Beth and Caroline had sewn together, white with blue trim. The children stood with them, Jace as Silas's best man, Beth as Clara's maid of honor, the others arranged around them like a promise of the family they'd become. Judge Harrison presided, his voice warm as he spoke about love that came from unexpected places, about choosing family, about the courage required to build something new from the ruins of grief. When he pronounced them married, the children cheered. Lily threw wildflower petals. Thomas accidentally hit Marcus with a handful of rice. Caroline cried happy tears. Samuel held Clara's hand through the entire ceremony, refusing to let go. The celebration lasted all day, food shared by the entire community, music from borrowed instruments, dancing under the stars. Mabel Hutchins gave a toast about stubborn women who refused to know their place. Anna Brennan spoke about the power of choosing courage over comfort. James Morrison told terrible jokes that made the children laugh until they couldn't breathe. And through it all, Clara watched her family, because that's what they were now, legally and spiritually, and felt something she'd almost forgotten, pure, uncomplicated joy. Late that night, after the guests had departed and the children were finally asleep, Clara and Silas stood in the yard looking at their land. "What happened to Eleanor?" Clara asked. She'd deliberately avoided asking before, not wanting to taint the wedding with thoughts of revenge. "Left for San Francisco 2 days ago," Silas said. "Sold most of her properties at a loss, desperate to get out before Robert Chen's investigation went public. Last I heard, she's living in a boarding house and giving piano lessons." He paused. "Apparently she's furious but powerless, which is probably the worst punishment she could face." "I don't feel triumph," Clara admitted. "Just sadness. She could have had so much if she'd just learned to connect with people instead of controlling them." "That's the difference between you and her," Silas said. "You see the humanity in people, even those who've hurt you. She never learned that skill." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead. "I need to tell you something," Clara said finally, "about why I ended up here, about my past. You don't owe me explanations. I know, but I want you to know anyway." She took a breath. "My husband died in the war, came back changed, broken, and drank himself to death within a year. I worked as a cook after that, but I kept getting fired. Too opinionated, they said. Too difficult. One family let me go because I told them their son was being cruel to their daughter and they needed to address it. Another because I refused to serve guests I knew were abusive to their own staff." She smiled bitterly. "I could have kept those positions if I'd just been quiet, if I'd just done my job and nothing more." "But you couldn't," Silas said. "No, I couldn't watch injustice and stay silent. Couldn't pretend not to see suffering." She looked at him. "So I ended up here, the last place that would take me. And I found—" She gestured at the house, the land, everything they'd built. "I found everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking for it." Silas pulled her close. "Then we're both lucky. Because I found something I'd stopped believing existed. Hope for the future." They stood there together, two people who'd been lost finding themselves in each other, in the children sleeping peacefully inside, in the land stretching out under starlight. The months that followed brought their own challenges. The barn had to be fully rebuilt. Winter came hard, testing their supplies and resolve. There were illnesses to nurse through, disputes to mediate, the endless work of running a ranch and raising 7 children. But they faced it together. Clara cooked and cleaned and managed the household. But she also taught the children to read better, to think critically, to stand up for themselves. She turned the garden into a thriving source of food and medicine. She organized the neighboring ranches into a cooperative, sharing resources and labor. Silas worked the land and raised the children, and slowly, gradually, became the man he'd been before grief hollowed him out. He laughed more, spoke more, allowed himself to believe in a future. The children thrived. Jace grew into a young man who could be both strong and gentle. Beth discovered a talent for sewing and started taking commissions from townspeople. Marcus filled journal after journal with observations about the world, already thinking like the writer he'd become. Caroline's drawings evolved from dark scribbles to beautiful art. Thomas's rock collection became the foundation for a genuine interest in geology. Lily spoke more each day, her voice growing stronger as her confidence did. And Samuel, the child born into grief, became the happiest of them all, proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds. A year after the wedding, Clara stood in the same kitchen where she'd first cooked for the family, preparing dinner for the harvest celebration. The house was full of noise, children arguing over chores, Silas negotiating with a neighbor about cattle prices, Mabel and Anna arriving early to help with preparations. Beth appeared at her elbow. "Need help?" Clara smiled. "Always." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind that came from deep familiarity. After a while, Beth spoke. "I've been thinking about that first day you arrived, how Jace told you that you wouldn't last, how we all thought you'd leave like the others." "I remember," Clara said. "What made you stay?" "Really? When it got hard, when Eleanor was attacking, when it would have been so much easier to just leave, what made you fight?" Clara considered the question. I think I was tired of running, tired of letting other people decide where I belonged. And you all," she looked at Beth, "you all needed someone who would stay, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And I wanted to be that person, wanted to prove to myself as much as anyone that I could be." Beth hugged her suddenly, fiercely. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you fought. I'm glad you're my mother now." Clara held her tight, this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd learned to trust again. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." That evening, they gathered around the table, all of them, plus neighbors and friends who'd become extended family. The table Silas and the boys had built to replace the old one groaned under the weight of food. Laughter and conversation filled every corner of the house. Clara looked around at the faces she loved, at the home they'd built together from ruins and grief and stubborn hope, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She'd come here a stranger, unwanted and alone. She'd stayed because something in her refused to give up, refused to believe that she didn't deserve a place at the table. And she'd found, in fighting for that place, that she'd given them something just as valuable, proof that broken things could be mended, that loss didn't have to be permanent, that choosing to stay was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. After dinner, after the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Claire and Silas sat on the porch in the cool evening air. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments together at day's end. "Happy?" Silas asked. Clara thought about it. Thought about the work still ahead, the challenges they'd face, the uncertainty of the future. "Yes," she said simply, "completely." Because happiness, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of difficulty. It was choosing to build something beautiful despite it. It was finding people worth fighting for and fighting for them with everything you had. It was deciding every single day to stay. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. Somewhere inside, one of the children called out in their sleep and settled again. The land stretched out around them, wild and difficult and precious. And in a house that had been a tomb, life continued, messy and loud and absolutely perfect. Clara Whitlock, the woman they'd all wanted gone, had become the center holding everything together. Not because she was perfect or because she had all the answers, but because she'd made one simple choice and stuck to it. She'd decided to stay. And in staying, she'd saved them all.